across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. Absolute pleasure to have your company. Very, very much appreciate you joining me. And goodness me, what an awful lot we have to talk about today. I've just come back, as I was saying to JK, from swimming with sharks. But wow, have we got a bigger fish to fry this morning. It's an absolute pleasure having your company, whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio or smart speaker, watching on YouTube on your connected device. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. I'm wondering whether anyone from the BBC will have the sense to listen or watch this show today. Maybe they might learn something, because as far as I can gather, there isn't a single person at the BBC that has got a bleeding clue just how serious the rot is at their organisation. And this isn't just about, you know, a documentary that was doctored about the BBC. It's not just about, you know, getting a Hamas official's son to host a documentary on Gaza. It's not just about, you know, having a paedophile, Hugh Edwards, presenting the news, even though there were numerous allegations for a long time from some pretty, you know, shall we say, put upon young men who were facing harassment from Hugh Edwards in the newsroom. It's not just the bullying and the allegations of sexism, God knows what, Strictly Come Dancing, or Greg Wallace's inappropriate behaviour on MasterChef, Gary Lineker's, before he was pushed out, incessant political tweeting about stuff he really knows very little about, ending finally with the anti-Semitic trope of a rat on one of his postings. It's not even just the obsession with trans, the absolute obsession, putting drag queens into everything, the simple lies about whether or not a killing or even a rape was committed by a woman or a trans woman, i.e. a biological man. It's not even, you know, taking Hamas's word as the gospel truth in every single report on Gaza. Hello, Jeremy Bowen, who still does that every day. It's not even putting Bob Villan on Glastonbury on live feed, and really no member of staff thinking there was anything vaguely wrong about the lead singer shouting death, death to the IDF and effing Zionists. No, not really an issue. It's all of the above. It's every single thing. It's the fact that two senior members of staff, Justin Webb at the Today programme and Martin Croxall on the BBC TV, have been disciplined in the last couple of years for perfectly reasonable comments. Justin Webb for pointing out that a trans woman was a biological male. Martin Croxall on BBC rather famously getting told off for her eye roll after she corrected the autocue which said pregnant people to pregnant women. It's not just that they got disciplined, it's the fact that as far as we are aware, and as we pay all their wages, would we not have a right to know, no one who thought it was a good idea to, you know, pay £1,000 to the family of a Hamas official for their son to host a completely biased documentary of life in Gaza for children has been sacked or disciplined. No one has been sacked or disciplined, again, as far as we know, for splicing together a panorama documentary played out in the autumn of 2024, which, not as a mistake, as all of the BBC figures who talk about this talk about, just a mistake that he accidentally, somehow, completely without realising, somehow put words that Donald Trump said at one point, spliced together as if they were just running straight into each other, that he said 54 minutes later, to completely mislead the viewer about what he was saying in terms of basically, was he or was he not, because he was not, inciting rioters to go to Capitol and cause mayhem. It's every single one of these. And the fact that nothing ever seems to happen. I know, I'm afraid, that Director General Tim Davie and the Head of News, Deborah Turner's, falling on their swords because they've been pushed onto them by senior figures saying enough is enough, is not going to be enough, because you've got people like Nick Robinson on the Today programme this morning defending the BBC. Now, it's lovely you're defending the organisation you work for, but if you are genuinely a serious person and you're a journalist of many years standing, and I would say in the case of Nick Robinson, huge integrity and ability as well, someone I hugely like and admire and respect, If you genuinely can't see the rot at the heart of your organisation, you've got a problem. If you genuinely think that the problem is either external forces trying to, destroy the BBC or internal forces trying to take individuals down, you have got a more serious issue than losing your Director General and a few bad headlines, or even the leader of the free world, Donald Trump, castigating you on social media. Your problem is that you genuinely are deluded, because if you don't realise how biased your organisation is, if you don't realise that the only people who are actually destroying the BBC are the people who work for the BBC, who lead the BBC, who present on the BBC, report on the BBC, produce the BBC, edit and direct the BBC. That the people who are doing that job, and every single day, day in, day out, put their own personal, let's face it, almost entirely left, liberal, progressive leaning views into every single thing they do, whether it's climate change, Trump, Brexit, trans, you name it. If you don't realise that it's that is destroying the BBC, nothing anything I say or anyone else says, it's that is destroying the BBC, then you are never, ever going to solve the problem. And at the end of the day, if and when the BBC is no more, it'll be your work, not ours. Well, that's what I've got to say about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV as well. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message. I would love to hear your thoughts on these big resignations at the BBC. What else should happen now? Does it tell us anything? Are we actually going to see any change at the BBC? Do you think the BBC should survive? That's it. Are you done? Is the BBC over? Maybe you've not been paying your licence fee for quite some time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. Now, love to hear the thoughts also of my guest. Always delighted to have him in the studio, sharing with the day with us today. On a Monday, Conservative commentator Mr. Benedict Spence, and his Movember Tash as well. Good morning to both of you.
We're happy to be here.
We are happy to be here. Well, we're very happy to have you. I mean, I've yapped on for a bit because I've not been on air for a week, so I've got a lot to say. What do you make of Tim Davie and Deborah Turness resigning?
I mean, it's the headline, obviously, but it doesn't really scratch the surface. You know, the thing is, Tim Davie could be incompetent, he could be highly talented. Either way, doesn't mean that he's the right person for the job. But does getting rid of this person solve the underlying issues? I would argue, obviously, not, because he was not, in fact, the one making these day-to-day decisions, even if the buck does stop with him. The question now has to be, to what extent is this about bias and about prejudice within the organisation towards certain political causes or ideological causes, and also how much of it is incompetence? Because as much as I reckon that there is a degree of people using their own personal prejudices to push certain agendas, I suspect there's also rather a lot of people who don't really know that much about this sort of thing, or any of these sorts of things, and just sort of go along with things because that's what they're told to do, or that's what they think is the right thing to do.
But I think that goes right to the very top. I mean, Deborah Turness, the head of news, in internal memos, repeatedly told BBC News staff, make sure you make it clear to the viewers that you have to make a difference between the Hamas terrorists and the Hamas officials who run Gaza, because they're not the same. Yeah, they are, sweetheart.
Yeah,
they're exactly the same. If you are the head of news of supposedly the most trusted news organisation in the world, you're being paid a fortune by taxpayers, and you think that there are goodies in Hamas as opposed to just the baddies in Hamas. I'm sorry, you have no business being in that job.
Yeah, without meaning to sound slightly snobbish, I would question whether or not the intellectual capacity of many people at the BBC is quite what it was, say, 30 years ago. And I think that this is something that is perhaps reflected across society. You know, we talk at length about the sort of the dumbing down of, certain media ecosystems and universities, and actually I think that that's probably reflected in society. It's certainly reflected in the calibre of our MPs, so why should it be any different in the BBC, which often draws a lot of its staff from the same sorts of pools of people? If these sorts of people, on the one hand, are not quite up to the job, why would we expect BBC staff?
I mean, look, these are highly educated, highly talented people. They've got very strong track records in other media or actually a lot of them. Well, a lot of them actually.
All?
Tim, yes, but this is the interesting thing. I mean, even the three runners and riders, all women, of course they're women. I'm surprised it's not a drag queen. I'm sorry, I'm surprised it's not a Muslim drag queen that is being put forward as the obvious choice to replace Tim Davie as a DG. But the three women, and they are all, I mean, woke as woke can be. Of course they are. Former Channel 4 boss, for goodness sake. But this is one of the things. Tim Davie, he's been a loyal. All the stuff about him being a loyal public servant for years. He's paid over £500,000 We'll all be loyal
Yes.
for £500,000 sodding quid, you know.
Yes.
But also, he was a PR man at Pepsi, right? He's a PR man at Pepsi, and then he moved into telly. The number one criterion for the next appointee to be director of the BBC is that they've never worked at the BBC.
Yeah.
That's
So
as far as I'm concerned.
what
You
you're
never having worked at the BBC would be the number one thing I would require. They've not got any loyalties. But here's
So
the
it
thing.
has to be a white man with a moustache, is what you're saying.
You're saying it should. Who do we know who could possibly do that? Look, I've told this. Everyone says he's a nice guy, right?
Yeah.
Everyone says, I've told this story before I've told bits of this story before without actually saying the name of the person, because I felt there was an element of there was a private conversation. But I'm going to tell you the full conversation now. So a few months ago, I was at a social event where I saw Tim Davie, now outgoing Director General of the BBC, and in a very friendly chat, just the two of us, I said, I really wish you would get to the bottom of and get to grips with anti-Semitism at the BBC. And he said, there isn't anti-Semitism at the BBC. And I said, look, there is. I said, look, I'm not, and I said this very clearly, I'm not in any way implying that you are anti-Semitic, or that the bosses are anti-Semitic, or the presenters, the correspondents. I know a lot of those people. I think they're nice, good people, and they're professional people. I said, I think, though, that the anti-Semitism at the BBC, and again, he hasn't gone for this, he's gone for Trump, but the anti-Semitism at the BBC, I think, is far more dangerous. It's far more, I think it's immoral, it's dangerous. I said that I think the anti-Semitism is so ingrained, it's so part of the culture that you guys don't even realise it's there. It's so institutionalised, you can't see it. So I almost don't blame you for it, you can't see it. At which point, someone else walked by, and deliberately in front of that person's earshot, he said, "You're accusing me of being anti-Semitic." And I said, no. I categorically said I didn't think that you or other senior people at the BBC were anti-Semitic. And I actually forced him to clarify to the other person that I hadn't. So I said, so I didn't say that. I've just said this to you. He was willing to totally distort what I had just said 30 seconds earlier to a third party.
Ironic, that.
To make me look like I had said something really quite outrageously rude to a fellow guest at this event. And that was the point when I thought, I thought you were a good guy who was doing his best and not doing very well. Now I think, well, from that moment on, I think, well, actually, no, I don't think you're a good guy. I think you are part of the problem, not part of the solution. And the whole, he's a Tory. You know, so was David Cameron. So were all the people who led the Ramon campaign, for goodness sake. Sod that. He's this idea that he's this nice guy who just hasn't been able to do the job to the best of his, to what we really wanted. It is not the case. Again and again and again, we've got all these cases where things have gone wrong and nothing is dealt with it until it's exposed. It was a Telegraph this week. Lots of the stuff going on has been exposed by the Sun newspaper as well. And, they only ever deal with anything once there's an outcry, once the culture secretary or someone comes down there. These are people who are totally and utterly unaccountable.
Yeah.
And yet we pay their wages.
And once again, you see the sort of the trend in British society, in the upper echelons of British society, which is never to admit, never to really apologise, to hide it as long as you can, and then maybe have an inquiry later. It'll be bogged down for a couple of years, at which point everybody's moved on to something else.
And also they will move. If they do have to
Exactly.
go, they move on to another nice
job.
little number.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing.
Tim Davie will be running Ofcom next.
There needs to be...
No, I'm not joking. He probably will.
That'll be, again, very ironic. But what there needs to be is, I don't want to say there needs to be root and branch reform at the BBC, because obviously there are going to be lots of areas that are fine because we're not necessarily, they're doing their job, they're not becoming the story. But I think, touching upon the anti-Semitism thing, and, you can put the Trump derangement thing to one side.
Yeah.
Lots of people have lost their minds over that. Fine, okay. I'm not saying that it should be allowed to continue, but it's not going to be an ongoing thing. We've got 3 more years of that maximum for it to matter. But the anti-Semitism thing, that is something that we have noticed at all levels of our society, driven especially increasingly, worryingly, by young people sort of entering the profession. That needs to be stamped on now. That needs to be addressed now, before those people become the middle managers and the upper manager, and they will become those people.
And the trans obsession as well, because I'm sorry, that hurts children. When you are pushing, that message to young children, and again, the CBBS, the news rounds, all of all that type of programming, they're obsessed with it.
Yeah.
This this is unhealthy. It's unscientific. It's not non-fact-based. The funny thing, the thing I really thought was funny yesterday was like, where's BBC Verify when you need them? I mean, when I've been approached by BBC Verify, they did a little piece. I can't remember something that I did, something to do with COVID, and I actually wrote back to them, hey, have you thought about investigating? And I gave them a long list of things that they could investigate of their own output. I find it extraordinary that we only just know about this Trump speech being doctored. I mean, the only reason we do it is because no one watches Panorama anymore, because we know how useless it is and how utterly biased it is. There are very, very, very few programmes in the news output that most people I know watch anymore, because you just know that you're not going to get much. Spike the other day did a brilliant documentary, about a 40-minute documentary. He spoke about it on air with Tom Slater, the political editor. And they did a brilliant documentary about people who've been investigated for so-called speech and hate crimes. And I said to him, this is like a Panorama documentary when Panorama used to be good.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, though, you look at all the sort of the flagship shows, be it comedy, be it current affairs, be it opinion. I mean, everybody used to watch Question Time. Who watches it now? Nobody watches Newsnight now, because it's just descended into whatever the hell that is. Things like Have I Got News for You used to be sort of cornerstone.
Used to be good when I was on it. Oh no, but I've been blackballed from all the shows that I used to be a regular on.
They're rubbish.
I was told, and I've been told by senior people that it's because of your views. Like, my views are completely mainstream.
I'll never get on them either, because I've association with you. This is all your fault. The nation has been denied.
But again, I mean, look, the BBC's been forced to create 2 Gaza stories a week. Just simple facts. We've got Jeremy Bowen still to this day standing by, reporting that the Hamas claims that Israel had bombed a hospital deliberately, when that simply was not true. And even afterward, he doesn't say, I shouldn't have listened to them, I shouldn't have taken their claims as truth. He stood by it. I mean, on what planet? More than 200 Jewish staff accusing the BBC of ignoring their calls for a probe into anti-Semitism. We know we've got the Bailey report from a long time back, which they've never actually published. We've got gender zealots at the BBC trying to block an interview with J.K. Rowling because of her very problematic views on trans issues. I mean, she's a women's rights campaigner.
Well, she's a women's rights campaigner. She's perhaps one of the only truly successful examples of British soft power alive today. Somebody who has single-handedly spawned an entire industry. Whatever her views are on anything, political or social, actually, this is somebody who deserves to be interviewed on the merit of their own work.
JK, I have you on the show every day of the week, my love. Come on.
But equally, the whole thing, the Gaza war has just warped all sorts of people, and also people, including, it must be said, respected journalists' ability to see what is news and what isn't. The fact of the matter is, we saw for months and months one side of the conflict, which was, here are people crying and shouting and saying it's genocide, and there's a war going on. Do we get to see any of the aspects of the war? No. Do we, we're told that there are sort of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian journalists. Do any of them actually sort of highlight anything other than the people crying? No. And you're thinking, well, that sounds an awful lot like propaganda. No. It was absolutely, treated as if it was news. And there was no curiosity about why is it that we're not seeing literally any of the other things you might see in a war zone.
Why are we never seeing footage of fighters taken into hospitals?
Exactly.
No, exactly. I mean, it is absolutely shocking. And again, while I've been away, seeing some stats, the war in Sudan, more people have died in the war in Sudan in 1 week. In 1 week, by the way, where there is a literal famine, people are literally dying of starvation. And there is a literal ethnic genocide going on in Sudan. More people die in 1 week than in the entire 2 year plus of the war in Gaza. What does that tell you? I'm still waiting for those marches every Saturday through London. Still waiting for them to start.
I mean, the appalling thing about that is, as we were saying, they would take the sort of the Hamas propaganda and go, oh, this is news. They're not called the Janjaweed anymore, the RSF. They literally film themselves going from village to village, shooting people, setting fire. Where's the outrage? That just doesn't get picked up. These people do not try to hide their atrocities. No. Nobody cares because it's Africans killing Africans, if we're honest.
Just as Hamas didn't hide their atrocities on October the 7th, absolutely. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this. Is Tim Davie resigning? Is Deborah Turness quitting over those Donald Trump clips being doctored together? That's the final straw, frankly, of a very, very, very large bale of straw on that camel's back, in my view. But is that actually the solution to the problem? Because frankly, I think it needs to be, root and branch. I think we are genuinely talking about an organisation that is rotten to the core and has been for probably 15, 20 years. And unless you can get to the bottom of that, and the first issue, look, like any human being or organisation with a problem, if you don't recognise you've got a problem, you can't start dealing with it. Can you, Nick Robinson? Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. 03444 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll get your calls on air up next. This is Talk.
Big news coming this December. Our Talk TV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the Talk TV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Welcome back to the show. 10:26 is the time. Let's get straight to your calls. 03444 499 1000 is the number to get in touch. Got some texts and tweets as well. As Tim Davie, Deborah Turness have quit as BBC bosses over revelations about bias, Donald Trump documentary, you name it, the rest. What's your reaction? Let's go to Robert, who's in Northumberland. Good morning to you, Robert.
Hello, good morning.
Okay.
Yes, well, I don't see any sign of remorse from the BBC staff. They're totally unrepentant,
Yeah.
and they got caught out this time. They went really too far, and they're blaming everyone but themselves. They're blaming Donald Trump.
Yes, yes.
It wouldn't have surprised me if they even blamed that El Salvador President Bukele, I think his name is, isn't it? And
But anyone but them. Well, there's this argument, isn't it, that, oh, well, we shouldn't let Donald Trump decide who runs the BBC or not. It's like, he hasn't decided that.
Well, I don't think the people really want this licence fee, but we're bullied into paying it. And I'm an ex-national serviceman, and I'm not going to pay mine next year. I have nothing to lose. You know, and if I start getting any bullying, I should just take euthanasia. I'm a citizen of Switzerland. I can do what I like.
That escalated quickly, Robert. I mean, I think we're all a bit frustrated by the BBC. I wouldn't go that far, my lovely. But this is the thing. I think a lot of people. I mean, people are saying, "Oh, you just want to defund the BBC." We have, representatives that defund the BBC on regularly. I'm actually not I don't want the BBC defunded as in not to exist. I just want the BBC to do the job we pay it to do, and I think it should do a lot less. It should be a much smaller sort of national organisation and allow free media, local papers and stuff to have a little bit more air to breathe and to do well themselves. But I think it's just too monolithic and frankly up its own backside.
Well, they're all incredibly rich people, aren't they? People like Greg Wallace and Hugh Edwards and Martin Bashir. They're all they're rolling in it, aren't they?
Well, they're very successful people, and I don't have an issue with successful people being well paid, do you?
Successful? Well, it depends what you call successful. People like Hugh Edwards, I don't know. I mean, was it really all that wonderful what he did?
No, well, that's the thing. But, you know, he was the voice of the nation for, you know, coronations and royal funerals and election nights. And then this is the thing. And as far as I can gather, everyone at the BBC knew he was, you know, he was basically sexually harassing young men and you know, including at work, and nothing was done about it. I mean, this is just obviously routine at the BBC, and no one says a word. But my God, don't roll your eyes when you correct an autocue to say pregnant women, not pregnant people, because you'll get in trouble.
Well, this is what Jimmy Savile, apparently. People knew about him, didn't they, apparently?
Yep.
We don't have any evidence, but...
Oh, no, there's plenty of evidence that people knew. Plenty of evidence. And at the hospitals. Yeah, everyone knew. Yep.
Well, they all deny it. I mean, they all say they didn't know anything at the time. They don't, you know, but it's all very cryptic how they just get away with it for so long. It just seems very odd.
The whole thing does. Well, again, it's, you know, the boys covering up for the boys, aren't they? Robert, thank you for your call. Appreciate that. Patrick is in East Yorkshire. Morning to you, Patrick.
Morning, Empress. How are you?
I'm very well indeed.
Yeah, well, just before we start, will you tell Benedict that a lad's had a bit of a prank on him with a marker pen for his top lip, and just get it rubbed off.
Now listen, the only person allowed to have a go at Benedict Spence is me and his mum, right? I'd like to say the man grows a very impressive tash.
Right, okay.
Oh, he's not convinced.
It doesn't sound convincing at all.
Wow, Patrick, what a way to start the week.
Yeah, back onto the subject. The government have got a massive problem coming over the hill.
Yeah.
It's the Royal Charter.
Yeah.
Now, all governments are bound by this Royal Charter, and it's gone from 2017, and it comes up in 2 years' time in 27. The problem is it's government-led, and they're supposed to have a consultation with the public of whether or not the licence fee should be carried on, all the legal stuff of whether they've all been good boys, etc., and where they're going to go in the future, and the problem is with the Labour government is they're very much on the left, like the BBC.
Yep.
So you can't cover it over forever, but they'll probably, Starmer will say, whoa, this is too much of a problem to me. Because of the current issues, we're going to delay this charter, carry it on, and do what he normally does, push it under the carpet and blame everybody else. Like the BBC are blaming everybody else.
I disagree. I think that he'll want to get it over and done with very quickly and keep sort of things as they are, simply because, and again, it's like the reason why, you know, Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, the only sort of major party leader, really defended the BBC today, is because actually they want to keep the BBC as it is because it's biased in their favour.
Well, I don't trust it. See, I used to trust the government, the BBC, as being a kid.
Yeah,
and
didn't we all?
everything came through the BBC. We used to trust the newsreaders.
Yep.
But now this is happening with Trump, which is an absolute disgrace.
Yeah.
Now, I wonder now, what was led to us by COVID? How much did they lie to us on COVID? Because they're
all day, every day. All day, every day, mate.
And you sort of go to the BBC for a little bit of assurance, don't you? Or used to do. But every day it's been eroded away by who they're employing. I mean, the panorama, it's all right dropping the top two people. Look at your credits on the programme and say, this was edited by so-and-so, this was produced by so-and-so, this was all verified by BBC Verify, which then up to another joke. So they should go as well and make an example of what's going on. There's no point in doing the people at the top because
couldn't agree with you more.
Doing it at the bottom.
Absolutely. Patrick absolutely nailed it completely. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. 10:33 is the time. Going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking to former BBC executive Roger Bolton. This may come to verbal blows. I'm just going to warn you. So, get your tea ready. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is good morning, welcome back. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 10:36 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Benedict Spencer with me, Conservative commentator. Just before we get to our next guest, Benedict, it is interesting. I mean, certainly an awful lot of calls on the board, lots of people getting in touch. 0344 499 1000 if you want to be among those getting in touch. And people are just very disappointed in the BBC. And again, the BBC, even two people resigning, two most senior people from very well-paid six-figure salary jobs, basically that isn't going to be enough because they clearly don't get it.
They don't get it, and people are irritated because they are the ones paying for this. And actually, I think it's right that we hold the BBC to the highest possible standards, given that it is the organisation through which we all have to fund in order to be able to watch anything else in this country. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, actually, we demand the very best. And that actually, every time there is an instance of dropping the ball or bias, that they get a proper slap on the wrist for this sort of thing. I think that's fair.
Well, they have to start being accountable, I think. I mean, if we have to be accountable to Ofcom, I think they should be, whereas actually they're accountable to themselves first stop, aren't they? Well, look, let's talk about this to someone who's a former BBC executive. Friend of the show, Roger Bolton. A very good morning to you, Roger.
Good morning, Jude. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, it's going to start off a pleasure. I know it's going to go...
You're so impartial. I mean, you're just open and to all points of view. It's wonderful.
I am open to all points of view, but it doesn't mean I agree with all points of view, because that would be weird, wouldn't it?
It would. It would.
Let's talk about, what is your point of view in terms of this, just in terms of the decision of Tim Davie and Deborah Turness to resign in the wake, particularly of the revelations in this internal report about this Trump documentary, but there's a lot more besides that. I mean, I would say Gaza and goodness knows what else besides. But what do you make of the decision of them to resign in the first place?
Well, I think that clearly there was an initial problem which we could discuss, but the fact that BBC was silent for the last week and that the BBC at the top seems to be hopelessly divided and couldn't get any statement of any sort out meant that they were just being hit and hit and hit. And eventually, of course, we're going to have the chairman today, allegedly, going to write a reply to the, finally, going to give a BBC view on all of this. So they've compounded what was a very difficult situation. I think lost a very good Director General in two. And but I should remind you that 4 BBC's Director Generals have resigned or been sacked in the last 40 years. 2 chairmen have resigned or been sacked. It's a tough old job.
Yeah.
You don't blame Tim Davie, who can probably earn about 5 times his salary elsewhere, after 5 years saying, I can't cope with this, particularly when you're faced with a divided board, a divided country. And I think this is the most important thing. Is I think trust throughout this country is difficult to find. We've got a polarization going on all the time. People are listening to their own perspectives reflected back to them. If you're in the middle of the road, which the BBC ought to be, you get run down by both sides.
Yeah, and one of the defences the BBC is often given is that we get criticised from both sides, so we must be doing something right. And
you could be wrong. They could be wrong, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think they are wrong on that. But I think I agree with you, we're a divided country, and I don't like the polarisation. I hate it. Like, I choose to follow various people on my X feed, for instance, and I keep getting defaulted to a For You, and they're sending me stuff that, no, I've chosen who I want to follow, and I follow a big range of people. I watch and listen to lots of different media because I want to know every different point of view, and I also want to test my own opinions by reading and hearing other people's opinions that disagree with mine to see if, I've got it wrong myself. And I have changed my mind on a number of issues as a result of doing that. Here's the thing, though. The BBC, as far as I can tell from everyone I speak to, from the bottom to the top, pretty much think that they are neutral. They think that they're not biased, they're not prejudiced, and this is just a horrible attack. And even Nick Robinson is in big sort of statement on Radio 4 this morning, and he's put it out on social media. Basically, there's been this stuff, it's an internal and an external attack on the future of the BBC by the enemies of the BBC. I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of the message going out. And a lot of people at the BBC seem to share that. I think the problem is something different. I think the problem is that they are so biased, so caught up in their little liberal, progressive, lefty bubble of central London bubble. They don't realise how out of touch they are, which is why they all look so shocked about Brexit.
It's
why they're all so shocked about Trump.
Can I have a word, Julia? Thanks. First of all, a lot of the BBC output doesn't come from London, comes from Manchester and elsewhere. Secondly, of course, the BBC has a lot of young people who are liberally inclined, a lot of Jewish people who support Israel, a lot of Muslims who don't. It's combined of a whole range of people. And the danger is, you're absolutely right, that there's a mindset. But then that's what you should have senior editors for, gnarled old people who look at this and say, no, if we could get down to the facts, it always helps if you get down to the facts on these things. The fact is that BBC wrongly edited, or rather the independent company working for it, wrongly edited a piece of material about Trump. But of course, Trump rejoices because he encouraged the Capitol Hill rioters to go there. He tried to steal, as he called the election a big steal. So he's very happy with that. Vladimir Putin will be delighted with what's happening at the moment because the BBC's reporting is pretty tough on him, and he'll be delighted that it's in trouble. When it comes to this country, we are so divided on so many issues that it is very difficult. Now, the BBC makes mistakes. Clearly, its executive, the board structure doesn't work at the moment. But I honestly believe that it's impossible to impose a single view on the BBC and tell its staff to do it.
No,
Look,
I don't want to view. That's where this is the thing. When you say divided, people are divided and like, here's my opinion whether I think that mass uncontrolled immigration is a bad thing, and someone else, working at the Guardian, could say I think that mass uncontrolled immigration is a great thing.
And the BBC shouldn't have a view.
And the BBC shouldn't have a view. And in its choice of stories and in the way it tells those stories and who it interviews, it shouldn't betray that view. But it does. And the reason why is because to a man and a woman, they take the leftist view. But
you're entitled to your view, and I'm entitled to my view,
but
which
they
is
aren't.
Wrong.
But they aren't. But this is where the job of the BBC is to present facts.
Yes, but it's difficult, isn't it, when people don't want to face those facts?
No, it's not difficult. People can choose to ignore them. The BBC's job is to present facts. I don't want to hear the BBC's opinion on anything.
We agree
I want them
about that.
to tell me the facts. No, but the point is,
Julia,
they
you
don't
and I agree. Julia
facts.
and I are arguing about nothing because we both agree the BBC should stick to the facts. The problem
you said it was hard for them to do that. I said I don't think it is. I don't think facts are hard at all.
I think it's hard for all of us to recognise our prejudices, put them aside and try and concentrate on the facts. And we all on the whole, we look for facts which will support our predetermined position. I think they're like that. I'm going to find things out. The BBC's job is to say, yeah, there are facts over here which aren't so convenient for you, and to present you with a rounded picture.
And they don't
When they
do
that. When they don't do that, they should be criticised. But they try to do it genuinely.
No, I think they don't try to do it. Look, on climate change, they don't do it. On trans issues, they don't do it.
Well,
on Gaza, they don't do it.
Hold on.
On Brexit, they didn't do it until they were legally required to in the 2016 election.
This is just not true.
It's 100%
Julia, you and your channel network have a particular perspective. Fine, I'm delighted.
I have my perspective. It's not my. I have only my personal views that I give. I don't give anyone else's, and I don't expect anyone else here to agree with my views.
People who listen to your channel can make that judgment. But what I'm saying is, it's quite fine for you to do opinionated stuff.
That's what I'm employed to do.
That's fine. We want an organisation which you can rely upon not to do that and to present us with the facts. In my view, the BBC generally does that. It's got a highest trust recognition of any media organisation.
People don't realise they're being lied to. Their climate coverage is so unscientific and unfact-based, it's a joke. Their pushing of trans agenda over women's rights, completely unscientific, unmedically proven and dangerous, I would say. Their coverage of Gaza has been, immoral and I would say dangerous.
Hold on. Can we just hold on? If we take Gaza alone, right, one of the fundamental problems is, as you know, that the Israeli government has not allowed BBC
That's not the problem.
to Gaza.
That's not the problem.
Secondly, it is true, it is absolutely true that there is a problem identifying the precise number of people who've been killed on either side. But the BBC has to report the facts, and the facts in that case are that vastly more people in Gaza have died than Israelis. BBC shouldn't make a judgment about whether that's good, bad, or give more sympathy. But
they quote Hamas figures. There's never been a war in history, Roger, where any government can say how many people have died in that war on the next day.
You will know this.
There's never been a single war in history.
You will know this, that when the BBC reports figures from Hamas, they say it's Hamas figures. They try and get the figures out of the Israeli government, which refuses to give any. But if you go to Haaretz...
Because there aren't any official figures.
No, go to Haaretz, which is a very good Israeli newspaper. The paradox here is that within Israel itself, there is far more criticism of the Netanyahu government than there is here. And, All the BBC has to do
because it's
is
a
to
vibrant
try.
democracy, which is why we should probably give more credence to things the Israeli government says, even though we can disagree with and criticise, as the Israelis can, than we should to a terrorist organisation. Bearing in mind, come on, Roger, bearing in mind that Deborah Turness, one of the most senior figures at the BBC who's just resigned, head of news, she's put out repeated internal memos to staff saying you should always remind viewers that there's Hamas terrorists, but there's also, the Hamas political wing running the actual government in Gaza, as if these were separate organisations. This woman has no business having anything to do with news coverage. If
That's
she
not
thinks
dissimilar.
that.
For example, going back in the Troubles, saying that look, if you look at the Republican side, you've got Sinn Féin, then question mark about now, and the IRA, and they work together, and one does the politics and one does the military. That was true. Now, of course, they're working together, and of course, it's true of Hamas. It has a political wing, it has a military wing. That's a fact. What's wrong with saying that's a fact?
If you think that is the salient quote fact in what's going on in Gaza, it's an absolute
It'd be naive
joke.
if you did. It would be naive
joke,
if you thought.
Roger.
It would be naive if you thought that Hamas wasn't operating on different levels, and that it's committed to the eradication of the state of Israel, that it commits terrorism. It's a vile organisation. Absolutely true.
A terrorist organisation, which the BBC won't say.
But the BBC's job is to report on all organisations, vile and otherwise. There are also people, by the way, who would say, well, actually, an Israeli court found that a member of Netanyahu's government is racist. Now, you have to report these things.
Of course they can report these things. I've got no issue. I never cover up any news at all.
You have the BBC, reports things that you find uncomfortable and things you find comfortable.
I'm not remotely uncomfortable with any facts whatsoever, whether they agree with my viewpoint, because my views on things are formed by knowing the facts. And the reason why the British people are so ill-informed about what's happening in Gaza, so ill-informed about the dangers of the trans propaganda that's impacting their children, the reason why they're so ill-informed about things like climate change and net zero policy is partly down to the fault of the BBC and their incredibly biased reporting, which is way beyond selection of facts. It's not even any facts involved.
You're entitled to your opinion, but it is your opinion.
It's a fact-based opinion, though.
And it's extremely one-sided opinions, and I disagree with the large
facts.
No, well, you see, there we are. We'll never agree.
I watch reports on the BBC repeatedly, which I know are factually untrue.
What you say is factually based. What you say is the fact, right? Other people have different views and say the facts are
different facts.
The BBC has
either the Great Barrier Reef is damaged beyond repair and is all bleached and is never coming back, or it is. I mean, it's one or the other, isn't it? And there's clear scientific proof that it's actually a regular bleaching event and that it's coming back and repairing itself just fine. But the BBC doesn't report that because it's not part of their agenda.
Well,
that's not fact-based reporting.
That's not true. That's not true. I don't know. You see, the trouble is, you're going to put this, that, and t'other across its output. The BBC has got to make sure that it represents a range of views, but where it can establish the facts, it should do so, and where it can't, it should have a range of views, and I think it broadly does it. The fact that in many cases, the opinions that are expressed are not ones you share doesn't mean that they're biased against you. You have a right to understand your perspective is there, but it's very.
But I'm forced. No. The key thing is, I don't want to hear the BBC's opinion. I keep saying this. I want them to present some facts, and they can say this side says and this side says. But they don't do that. They have a literal policy of not having people on who what they call climate change deniers.
No, they don't.
They quite literally do. I know a number of people who've been told categorically by figures at the BBC that the reason they are no longer invited onto their shows is because.
No, hold on. Hold on. If you want a discussion about climate change, you should go for climate change experts. And the BBC should represent...
Like Greta?
Hold on. And the BBC should find, if there are climate change experts who disagree with the consensus...
there are loads of them.
Hold on, let me finish. Agree with the consensus, they should put them on. What you can't do is have, let's say... 19 and a half or 20 people agree on climate change experts this way, and there isn't another person on the other side. You refer to the fact that there are other views, but you don't give them the same weight if the sort of majority of scientists and others think something.
That's not how science works,
the
Roger.
minority are represented.
Otherwise, the sun would still be revolving around us, wouldn't it?
No.
I mean, I'm sorry,
right
that's literally not how science works.
No, hold on. You are right in the sense that science advances by the consensus being challenged, but it's challenged by people of the quality of a certain quality, not somebody who happens to have something on the internet.
Okay,
and whatever.
let's go to the example of COVID. I was the sole broadcaster during many long months of COVID who was challenging the lockdown narrative. I mean, literally every press conference, BBC, Sky, everyone else asking the same question again. When are we locking down more? When are we locking down more? And now I was in a very, very small minority, along with people like Toby Young and Brendan Early, people like that. But we've been completely proved right by the facts.
Hold on. Can I just answer that one? Right. You had the British government, supported by the opposition, the government, the Conservative government of Boris Johnson, saying there should be a lockdown. In a national emergency like that, hold on, in a national emergency like that, the BBC has a responsibility both to represent the government point of view and give great weight to it because it is a national emergency, and then look for those who are informed who disagree. If they don't find some people,
found plenty of people.
They should
Oxford University professors.
This was a national emergency. Clearly, as everybody said subsequently, we didn't as a country deal with it very well.
No, people said at the time. Oxford University professors, eminent professors,
but the point I'm telling you
experts in epidemiology said at the time.
Yeah, but these are political judgments. They're fine judgments about what's the best thought.
That's my point, Roger.
It's not for the BBC to tell you what's the best political judgment.
No,
it's not
exactly.
Roger,
you're making my point, not your point.
No, I'm just saying that you may be absolutely brilliant, but the BBC can't assume that you're always right. I'm sure you are.
I absolutely don't assume I'm always right, but I try not to think I'm right if I haven't got a single fact on my side. Roger, we're going to have to leave it there. It's been a pleasure having you on. Former BBC executive. Get a quick word for Benedict Spencer. We're going to have to go to a break because I'm going to get told off.
I'm just delighted to know that scientific consensus is formed by people of a certain quality, because of course most of the scientific consensus of the modern era was literally created by gentlemen amateurs with too much time on their hands.
Exactly.
So it's good to know that I still have a value.
We're going to a break. This is Talk.
Big news coming this December. Our Talk TV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the Talk TV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now. Big news coming this December. Our Talk TV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the Talk TV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. 10:56 is the time. Benedict Spencer with me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Ops. And I have to say, this BBC story. Roger Bolton, all credit to him. He does come on the show. We're going to talk to Danny Cohen, former head of news at the senior boss at the BBC, who's been talking about BBC Bass for quite some time, having worked there. But it is absolutely fascinating, this idea that it's very difficult for the BBC to be neutral when you've got this side having a go at you and this side having a go at you. And it is true. There are loads of, let's face it, completely stark-staring lunatics on the left who think that the BBC is completely Tory and pro-Israel. These people are utterly insane, in my view.
Yeah, there are. But it's one of those things where I think for a long time, because you'd have people on both sides going, you're biased about this, you're biased about that, the corporation would take that as a sign of, we're doing something right because we're irritating both sides.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that was possibly true. Once upon a time, I suspect it was probably true. But I think that has allowed a sense of complacency, which is that actually, if you are being criticised from all directions, actually it doesn't matter. You can block out the noise because nutters will be nutters.
Maybe everything you're doing is wrong.
But that's the problem. Then sometimes you will miss those key things that actually are. And so when, for instance, and this is the thing, especially when it comes to things like anti-Semitism, that ought to be I don't think Jewish people walk around shouting anti-Semitism like the boy that cries wolf. It is the canary in the coal mine. When you start getting those accusations, you do need to take it very seriously.
And when women are saying we don't refer to pregnant people, very pregnant women, and are not wanting our entire existence erased. But this is the thing. It's like it's like on Brexit and reform and Nigel Farage. There are still people constantly messaging that the BBC is totally absolutely just on its knees to Nigel Farage, and it's totally a reform. And you think, what BBC are you watching? What they mean is Nigel Farage has been on the BBC quite a lot, and then they'll notice there's a speech given by Nigel Farage, and the BBC has covered it like everyone else has covered it, in the same way that they cover a speech by Ed Davey from the Lib Dems. Funnily enough, yes, they have on a representative of a party which currently is leading in the polls, and the most influential politician of his generation when it comes to Brexit. That's not being on your knees to Nigel Farage. That's just you have to cover what he says.
The other thing with that, of course, is question time, when people would always say, why is Nigel Farage on question time? They'd say that even after the Brexit vote, even after it was proven a majority of people who voted
as well.
But this is the thing. There's a dearth of people sort of in the public sphere. Why? Because they aren't platformed so often by things like the BBC. I'm sorry, you are going to have those people on slightly more than the average person, because they are the sole representatives that the BBC is prepared to go, we'll have that person because they're senior enough. And actually it's the fact that people outside sitting there going, they shouldn't be on at all, shows you what they think the BBC should be, which is a propaganda channel, rather than an impartial broadcaster.
I don't expect to agree with everything on a station or agree with everything, and I don't want my view. I don't feel any need to have my viewpoint represented in any of the BBC. I just would like you to give me some neutral facts. And I'm sorry, facts are neutral, that you don't get to choose your own. And the BBC is failing at that. I'd love to hear your thoughts about those resignations. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 11 o'clock. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for joining me here at Talk, the home of common sense, of course. And whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio, on your smart speaker, you're watching on YouTube or your connected device, thank you so much for your company. I forgot to nag you about this an hour ago. Don't forget to go to my YouTube page, the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. You can find it very easily. Just put those words in, hit subscribe, and you never have to miss a thing. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be talking more about the BBC facing its worst crisis in more than a decade, they're saying, after Director General Tim Davie and the head of news Deborah Turnhouse quit last night over revelations of bias at the broadcaster. The resignations followed the disclosure of serious and systemic problems at the broadcaster by an internal whistleblower, Michael Prescott, which included the doctoring of a speech by Donald Trump for Panorama. Now, reacting to the resignation, US President Donald Trump took to the True Social website to slam Tim Davie, saying the top people in the BBC are all quitting or fired because they were caught doctoring my very good, brackets, perfect, close brackets, speech of January the 6th. Also going to be talking about the view that Islam is problematic and should be criticised as a protected... the view that Islam is problematic and is able to be criticised should be a protected belief under equalities law. A judge has ruled that. This comes after Patrick Lee was found guilty of misconduct after some posts he put on X by a trade body, the Institute of Faculty of Actuaries. The trade body ruled that 42 of his posts that criticised Islam were either offensive or inflammatory or both. But following an employment tribunal, he has won legal protection for his beliefs, and so has everyone else. We'll be talking to Lord Young of the Free Speech Union about that coming up. Lots more besides. We're also going to be talking to former Labour Party Special Advisor Paul Richards in just a couple of moments as well. First, though, let me bring you back to Benedict Spence, Conservative commentator. He's joining us today. Benedict, it's very interesting, actually. We were talking so much about internals at the BBC earlier, and obviously I want your reaction to everything. Don't forget to give us a call, 0344 499 1000. But Donald Trump's reaction is very interesting, and criticism of people here saying Donald Trump is basically deciding who runs the BBC. It's our NHS and our BBC. Because we're forced to pay for both of them, whether we like it or not. But the idea that Donald Trump has in any way played a role in this, I mean, the reality is, if you didn't splice together two parts of Donald Trump's speech from January the 6th, 21, 54 minutes apart to make it look like he had basically said, I'm going to be with you, going to fight, and inciting people to physical violence on the Capitol on January the 6th. If you hadn't done that, then nothing. Then things would be okay. I mean, the BBC's brought this on themselves.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump might have brought this forward, perhaps, but actually this was
always going to happen.
It was always going to happen, and the thing is, the very fact that they thought that they could do that, is because I think they probably thought, look, he's never going to get into power. We know what's best. We know what's going to happen in the next election, and ultimately, that is to reckon against Donald Trump, to bet against Donald Trump, which is a very foolish thing. And I'm sorry, the BBC and members of the BBC may feel that they're insulated being here in a different country, but the President of the United States, especially this one, carries an awful lot of weight. And, it's very hard to hide. From the President himself. It's also very hard to hide if you're a national broadcaster broadcasting in English. It's very hard to hide it from the President as well. He's going to find out about that sort of thing. He's quite a vengeful person. He is the sort of person who goes after people. But actually, that's because the media ecosystem in the United States is far more partisan and frankly warped. And I have to say, this should be a warning, actually, to the BBC. You don't want to go down that route.
I don't want us to go down that. I want to hear lots of different points of view. The only reason, genuinely, organisations like ours, and there are rivals, are actually needed and have been successful is because of the bias. And again, Sky News used to be an alternative to the BBC. I mean, it's now more woke than the BBC. It's just going straight down that route. ITV as well. You've got Channel 4. You've only got, the so-called mainstream media only just pushes one agenda. We haven't got that variety. And then they say, is it terrible because you give your opinion? Yeah, because I'm literally in a job that asks for my opinion.
I'm just going to say one thing there, and it's very noticeable how these sort of roles have changed. Sky is now the one that's sort of talking about Sudan in a way that lots of people didn't. Channel 4 News, once upon a time, would have been the broadcaster that was going to those places. It isn't interested in those because it's been so focused on Gaza. It's very interesting to see how roles can be reversed and opportunities can be taken. You know, there is opportunities where the BBC drops the ball for other broadcasters to pick up the slack, and they should be careful about that.
There's a difference between the BBC not covering a story and the BBC covering a story in such a biased way that people I know who are very unpolitical have views of, for instance, Israel and Gaza, or which are totally skewed by, frankly, the lies that the BBC puts out. Look, let's talk about this and other topics also with my next guest. We went rather late in the first hour, just back from Beholds. I'm not very good at the timings. So let's talk to Paul Richards now, former Labour Party Special Advisor, who very kindly has hung on to speak to us. Good morning to you, Paul.
Hello, good morning.
I'm still on Indian Ocean time, mate. I've got no idea what's going on.
Don't worry.
It's a hard life. First world problems. Paul, I mean, I want to talk to you about some asylum stories in the news, but I must ask you first of all about the resignations of the Director General and the Head of News at the BBC.
Yeah.
Do you welcome them going, and do you think anything will change?
Well, I've known Tim Davie a long time. He's a perfectly decent chap, a Conservative Party supporter, of course, not part of the woke Liberati, but I think he was
There's
just
plenty of woke Tory supporters.
I think, well, true. I think, to be honest, though, it was an accumulation of scandals. It wasn't just this latest one with Trump, but also the Glastonbury fiasco, all kinds of other editorial foul-ups. And I think he just got to the point where for the BBC to renew its charter next year, it's going to need somebody else at the helm to take that.
But isn't the issue, I mean, listen, no one thinks that Tim Davie went, let's put Bob Villan on and leave the feed on the Glastonbury. Nobody thinks that he paid the £1,000 to the son of a Hamas official to host a Gaza documentary. No one thinks that he personally said to Gary Lineker, go and post all those tweets, including the anti-Semitic trope. Or why do you? Hey, I'm sitting in the editing room with Panorama. Let me tell you, you should spice this. No one thinks he's personally responsible, or even Deborah Turness, the head of news. But the point is, when they find out about these things, they keep them quiet, they sit on them, no one's disciplined, unless you do an eye roll about pregnant people on BBC, you don't get in trouble.
They both resigned. I mean, I think...
They haven't resigned because of that. They've resigned because of the outcry over it, which is different.
I think it's because all of it accumulating to the point where they have to go. It's like ministers, the ministers aren't responsible for individual acts of, let's say, a prison officer, but on the other hand, they are ultimately responsible, and the buck does stop somewhere. So Tim's done the honourable thing of venturing to see who replaces him and whether it leads to actually systemic change of the kind we need. I mean, I agree with you completely that the Gaza coverage has been a disgrace. I think this splicing of the tape of Trump is just pure propaganda, completely wrong. Somebody in the room will have done that, by the way. So who is that?
It's not a mistake.
Are they resigning?
Well, they shouldn't resign. They should be sacked and lose their pension. Sure, they should. I'm sorry. That's a sacking offence. It's as simple
let's find out who they are then, because it's all very well and good. To say,
as one of our callers pointed out, there'll be credits for that Panorama. Who was the editor? Who was the director? Who was the exec producer? There you go.
And was it not a production company? So I mean, are they going to carry a contract with the BBC? So that the other people need to take the blame for their actual actions, as well as Tim Davie taking the blame for the overall foul up. But what's next? I think why is the board so opaque? How do they get appointed? How do I apply to be on that? I've never seen a job advert for that job, and that's an important role, as we've discovered. How do we shed more light on it? If the BBC, which I support, by the way, Julia, if it's going to survive in some form or other, and maybe there will be more commercialisation, but if it's going to survive as a national broadcaster, it's going to be more open and transparent about how it's run and who runs it.
Do you think that anything will change it? Because if they're saying, and Deborah Turness in a comment she made this morning on the way into work, because they haven't left just yet, saying, we are not, BBC is not institutionally biased. I mean, I think if you don't even recognise that it's got institutional biases, you can't even begin to solve the problem. Nick Robinson basically claiming, to all intents and purposes, this is a conspiracy against the BBC internally and externally. Do you think that's the truth?
Well, I think both things can be true. I think there are lots of people who would like to bring down the BBC, and that's obvious.
Most of them seem to work at the BBC in high level, if you ask me.
Either for commercial reasons or political reasons or any other kind of reasons, but it's also true that you can't tar the entire institution with the brush of a few idiots that have done some very bad things.
Met Police is institutionally racist, we were told.
Well, I think that's a separate issue.
No, I'm just saying, no, for you to, literally, it's completely the norm on the left to tar an entire institution with a particular viewpoint.
Oh, I see. Well, I don't think the BBC is in that boat, but I do think there are problems, and I think they need to be addressed beyond, just getting the head to roll. I think certainly the Select Committee today is going to look at this, and I think that's a good start. You need parliamentary oversight. It is taxpayers' money after all.
Good point.
But I think. But I do think that, whoever is actually directly responsible, the person who sat there with, I don't know what it looks like now, but, spools of tape and a slicing knife, whatever it is these days, digital version of that, whoever's done that needs to come out and say sorry and be sacked as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more on that front. Let me talk to you about another story which we'd already invited you on to talk about, which is the asylum seekers, we're told by a Home Office, are going to be given £100 a week if they agree to leave taxpayer-funded hotels, which are costing on average £145 a night, under plans to be considered by ministers. They're proposing migrants use the money to pay to live with a family or an individual they know, to basically get them out of asylum hotels that cost too much money and, let's face it, attract too much bad publicity, and then get them into, probably sleeping on someone's sofa. They'll still get the 49 quid allowance they get a week, plus that 100 quid, not just one-off, a week. Is that the solution to the mass, illegal migration problem?
Well, you can't have it both ways. People have been clamouring to close these hotels. A absolutely disastrous policy, by the way, and it hasn't worked and it's been terrible. So let's get rid of the hotels. But where are they going to go instead? And to put them in with a lot of the pull factors for people coming on the boats is that they know people here already. Well, okay, they can stay with them. And £100, to you and I sounds like a lot of money. But I mean, in the overall scheme of things, of these profiteering hotel bosses who are trousering it in on this failed
only because
scheme.
the Home Office can't negotiate for toffee.
Yeah, agreed. It's a disaster, public policy disaster, which is why the Labour government is saying we're going to close the hotels and end the policy because it just doesn't work.
Well, the Tories said they were going to do that as well. I don't want these people out of hotels and living in the house next door to me. I want these people in internment camps and then shipped off home. I don't want them on the streets.
An internment camp, is one view, isn't it? I don't know how you put 80,000 people into an internment camp.
Yeah, it's kind of the problem, isn't it?
And then when you have people saying, OK, well, let's put them in these disused military bases, like the one in Crowborough, people are demonstrating against that as well. But like I say, if you want to close the hotels, you have to have a policy that means people go somewhere. And a small incentive to get out of the hotels and go and stay with a friend or a neighbour or a family member may be one of the solutions. It's not the only solution. Shabana Mahmood has talked about a Denmark-style system over the weekend, which is a much tougher version. Denmark is a social democratic government, but they've got super tough with the asylum system, and they are disincentivizing people to come and making
the numbers they've actually managed to deport on the basis their super tough system isn't really up to scratch. I just want to ask one more question though, because apparently leaked Home Office documents suggest the government has identified at least 14 sites where up to 10,000 migrants can be placed as part of a major shake-up. Again, this idea there are all these places where you can put migrants, but isn't this is an internal geographical problem and a cost problem, as opposed to dealing with the actual problem? Is A, these people are still here after all these years, B, we can't get rid of them, and C, more of them are coming.
Well, we certainly need to stop the boats. We certainly need to speed up the repatriation of people who shouldn't be in the first place. And that shouldn't take a year to sort it out. But in the meantime, while people are being processed, let's get them out of these hotels, which are flashpoints, as we've said, and get them into camps, maybe ex-RAF, ex-military bases, or whatever it might be around the country, which is what this Home Office plan seems to involve. But people don't like the hotels. So the Labour government is closing the hotels. Job done.
They don't want the migrants here. I would rather have them in hotels where we know where they are.
Well, that's an unpopular...
Other than in camps. But I don't want them living on an MOD base and wandering in and out freely. I want them in an MOD base surrounded by barbed wire.
Well, again, that's a view, isn't it? But I think it'd be far better
majority
if they're
view.
I would put them in high vis. I'd have people out in teams picking up litter, sorting out graffiti, cleaning up canals and doing something useful for their £49 a week, rather than just sitting around doing nothing in a camp.
Yeah, or we could just get them, making dinghies and making their way home. Paul Richards, so appreciate you hanging on to talk to us. Former Labour Party Special Advisor Paul Richards there. Thank you very much. Just on the Benedict's events, on those stories involving asylum seekers, that £100 a week, could you please, could you leave the hotel? You're costing us £145 a night, in which you can cost us only £35 a night if you're in rented accommodation, or you can cost just £100 a week if you move in with your mate. Please, can you do that? This is similar similar to the, yes, I know you shouldn't have been released by accident or you're supposed to be deported, but if we give you 500 quid, and by the way, that guy, the Ethiopian, he got 500 quid to go on the plane, he was done because he could have got up to 2 grand. The Home Office allows for up to 2 grand to pay people to get on planes to not cause a fuss and get them, have the flight, stopped and the things, all that stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, we are bribing people to do things that they should be legally required to do anyway.
Yeah, if you pay the Dane Geld, it doesn't mean the Danes go away. They keep coming back because they think, free money. And that's literally what this is. And I also don't like the idea of saying, well, we should be putting them to work and stuff like that for their fortune. So what, we're going to be paying them effectively for the work that they've been doing, then a subsistence existence, which is tantamount actually to slave labour, if we're honest, given the amount of money that they're being given for that wage. That's immoral. But then they'll turn around and say, but they've been working, so that helps their cause to stay in the first place. So it's kind of like, so if you do a little bit of slave labour on the side, then you'll get your papers signed and you'll get to... Like, how does that work morally? And it's not what anybody wants. It's not really even what they want, if we're being honest.
They're too busy working anyway. They're making better money on Uber
exactly. Exactly. There are other ways that they're coming into the country illegally and, them working illegally, they can do a lot better. As you say, people want them sent home. They don't want them in hotels. They don't want them in their communities. If it's a question of either or, they'll have them in the hotels because that is better than having them with their mates or just in a random housing
accommodation. I genuinely would rather have it. I'd rather know that that's where the local people. Although let's face it, they're probably all over. I mean, again, I say I've got Asylum Hotel just a 10-minute walk from my home. But I'm guessing, other than the 80 blokes in there that hanging around on the street outside, I'm guessing that there are more of those people living in neighbouring. There's loads of council flats near me, and I'm sure they're in them.
All of this is foot dragging so that they don't have to address what people want, which is to send them home, because they shouldn't be here in the first place.
Did you read it? I mean, I've been away, but I always like to keep up on the news. My brilliant friend Alison Pearson at the Telegraph, a fantastic interview with a woman who works as an asylum, basic assessor, and said the pressure that is on them to, even if someone has been, accused or convicted of serious sexual offences, to grant asylum. Certainly certain countries, look, we can't send them back to here or here. You're just going to have to get them off the books. And the Home Office basically, they say they would rather just have them off the books, take them off, and then we're told, see, these people are legitimate, because otherwise they wouldn't be having such a high rate of success in terms of actually winning asylum or winning their appeal for asylum. Whereas in fact the truth is we are setting such a low bar for allowing people to stay in our country.
It's quicker and cheaper to just wave them through than to try and send them back, and because sending them back is expensive and sounds like hard work.
It's quicker and cheaper in the short term.
Of course, in the short term.
Long term,
to the people
we're going to pay for these people for the rest of their lives.
But of course, we also had the phenomenon, didn't we, of them saying, right, well, we're going to prioritise women and children's applications because they're the most vulnerable and they're more likely to be approved. They did that, and of course, lots of them were approved, at which point they then turn around and say, see, the majority of people who apply for asylum get approved for it. And it's that kind of fiddling of the stats and the processes that I think really annoys people.
By the BBC, by the way, leads us back full circle.
It really annoys people because people can see what's happening in real time.
Stupid.
We're not stupid. I know that they'd love to think that we're stupid, and we can occasionally be a little stupid.
Well, and we've got to remember, and we're racist as well. This comes back to, again, the debate over, we're sort of, well, what do you do? As our last guest says, Paul Richards, well, what do you do? You've got 80,000 people. Yeah, and why have we got 80,000 people? Because when anyone tried to raise the issue of illegal migration, Nigel Farage, speaking at the moment, doing a press conference in Central London. I mean, it's a Monday. There's always a Reform press conference. But every time, he was the one who did the first filming out in the Channel, going, look, these boats are arriving. Hey guys, there's a problem here. Such outrage. These are asylum seekers. These are desperate men fleeing persecution. That was the line from the BBC and others. That was what was pushed. Talk to another refugee charity, and Geraldine from it's always, or Esmeralda or whatever it is. There's always some posh bird who's decided to make her life about refugees and after leaving her boarding school.
An activist who is always portrayed as academic and specialist.
Yes, exactly. When actually they're just an activist. Or they run an organisation that they themselves set up as a one-man band. And then they treat these people as if they are experts in this field about this terrible lives these people lead. The reporting on this has been completely biased, and again, the BBC is at the forefront of that. When British people are going, are you sure about that? Because we're not sure about it. The refusal to push to no levels of crime. why shouldn't we know the nationality of the people or the immigration status of the people who are committing crimes in this country? I think that's perfectly relevant to know. No, it's bigoted. No, it's bigoted.
Yes,
to even want to know that, it's bigoted.
Exactly, to simply ask the questions and to not be given a good answer, just to be told, well, that's dangerous for you to know the answer and you shouldn't be asking that question, rather than, well, there are X, Y, Z practical reasons why we haven't done it yet, but we'll look at maybe changing that in the future. It's never even that. It's simply, now, why would you want to know that sort of thing? It's just, why would you want to exercise?
Because I suspect there is a higher rate of sexual and you know, acquisitive crime and violent crime by young men from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Sudan and Ethiopia. And guess what? It turns out there is.
You'd think, if it wasn't true and we were all just fantastical bigots, they'd tell us, they'd give us the information. But they won't, because there might be something in it. And they don't want us to know that.
Exactly. It is extraordinary, isn't it? And again, I'm sorry, I think a lot of this, I think, you know, when you go back to you know, conversations about the EU, about Brexit, you go back to conversations about the trans madness, the climate change insanity and net zero, you know, and Israel and all of that. You come back to lockdown again and again and again. You've got the mainstream media, in inverted commas, but particularly led by the BBC, pushing an agenda. Now, they claim they're not pushing an agenda. It's the fact they don't even know they're doing it. It's the fact they don't know they're doing it. That's the bit which I find extraordinary.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the crossover, isn't it? Because as I say, lying in our politics has become deeply ingrained. There's simply no point in actually expecting people to, you know, pledge their manifestos and stick to it.
Although I hear David Lammy did terribly well at Deputy Prime Minister's questions last week.
Oh, faultless. But the point is, the people who enter, as I've said before, people who enter our politics in this country, and the law and other professions, the BBC is the same. They draw from the same sorts of areas. And it's when you see the crossover between those industries and you understand, well, lying is deeply ingrained in this one, and this is from where the power stems. Why would it be different elsewhere in the BBC? They think it's acceptable in the pursuit of some higher goal, because that's their ideology.
Well, educating us mortal, you know,
those of us who didn't.
Heathen bigots. Who just drug
didn't go to the right school or the right university.
I always say, see, it's Adam Bolton when he was at Sky News. We had a lunch. I go, babe, I was in the lobby in the House of Commons, and him saying to me, you know, but you're a Brexiteer, and he actually said, but you're one of us. You're one of us.
One of us. That was nice.
You're one of us.
At least you felt accepted.
But you're educated. You're one of us. You must know better. It was like you must be lying, or I mean, that was the attitude. But I mean, that's such an extraordinary attitude to have to someone who doesn't share your political views.
Again, to sort of come through the education system of this country, which at its highest level is almost supposedly the best in the world, and for there to be a lack of criticism, a lack of critical thought, the idea that everybody must surely come to the same conclusion. That's where you kind of sat there going, it's not just the BBC or politics. That, in fact, is where the problem lies.
Am I guilty of it in the same way over things like Israel and trans, where it's like, well, how could you not come to the same conclusion that men can't become women and they can't get into women's spaces? How could you not come to the conclusion that the bad party, the overall bad party in the Israel-Gaza war is Hamas, not the IDF? I mean, are we not guilty of the same bias?
Well, we're not guilty of thinking the same thing as the majority, because clearly the majority do not think that at the BBC and in politics, because for a very long time we had to listen to the nonsense about the trans stuff as if we, in fact, were the lunatics. But the majority of people who, you know, have not, in fact, been through Britain's sort of highest educational establishments, who kind of sit there and go, well, that just on a very fundamental basis doesn't make any sense. Actually, I'm more inclined to go with that, because, as is said, you know, there are some things that only highly intelligent people could possibly believe, because you break down the different structures of how one it is that you construct.
They're not highly intelligent. They're supposedly highly educated. They're actually highly indoctrinated, and they don't realise.
No, I do think that intelligence plays a role in this. I don't think intelligence necessarily correlates to common sense at all.
I think the most. I know some people who are utterly brilliant. I say I couldn't trust them more than
it is a famous story about Einstein that he could never remember where he lived. You know, he was off in his own world, and he would stand on the street thinking, now which house is mine? Now, fair enough, they all sort of look the same, but still there is that. So when it comes to highly intelligent people, I'm not saying everybody who works at the BBC even approaches that, but that's from where it sort of stems from. You can go off at such tangents on all sorts of unbelievably insane, interesting theories, and it just takes you further and further away from reality. Marxism is a fantastic example of this.
Absolutely.
A fantastic example of how highly intelligent people can just warp their worldview by reading this stuff.
Yeah,
Anyway.
it's very, very interesting. 11:26 is the time. I'd love to. Let's have an existential chat on a Monday morning, why don't we? A couple of great calls coming up. Lots of your messages coming in. Loads of other calls on the board. Try to get to as many as I can about, let's face it, the BBC. That's up next. Give us a call 0344 499 1000. What are your thoughts on those resignations? Will anything change? Is the BBC not institutionally biased? Because that's what they're claiming at the top of the beep. Send your message to 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost 1. Standard network rate message. This is Talk.
The government lent on Tim Davie to resign in order to keep Trump happy. Your thoughts on that?
I think, in truth, the resignation was necessary. What about the producer, the person that put this programme together and oversaw the ridiculous and biased cut that took place? We've not heard anything about that individual or individuals. What's happening to them? I mean, it's all very well for people even higher up the chain who may or may not have known at all anything of this. But at the level where programmes are produced, this is where the BBC is falling down.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Morning, welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's get straight to your calls. Tarquin is in London, wants to talk about the BBC. Tarquin, whenever I go to you, I always think, oh, he sounds like he works at the BBC.
I know, it's one of those names that is important. I'm going to have to change it.
You try being called Julia Hartley-Brewer, mate. What do you want to say, my love?
Well, Jay Arnott and JHP, hats off to you, sweetheart. That was a fabulous job you did at trying to nail that Roger the Dodger ex-BBC quote. You were brilliant because he was just so full of himself. I hate that pompous, sanctimonious, priggish attitude. It was his attitude that seeped out of his pores, and you were having none of it in your typical Irish way, my darling. Well done there. Beautifully.
I like Roger. I'm not going to have a word said against him. But yeah,
honestly,
we don't agree.
Defend the indefensible. You know, the jury is out and back in again. It's made its verdict on the BBC. The fact that he's sat there and tried to, you know why he did it, because he is an apparatchik. He is, that's, you know, he's going to say that, isn't he? That's all he knows. But the point is, the BBC, and I know this is, I sound like a scratchy old record, nobody has to have that license. If they don't watch any live broadcasting or watch iPlayer, they must defund the BBC tomorrow. If they really feel strongly, I haven't already done that already, and there's no legal obligation. If you watch any live broadcast, though, you do need to have it, so that's like, it goes both ways. But if you genuinely don't and you want to register your program, get rid of this switching off anything.
Well, but wait a minute, but I do want to watch live broadcasts, and you know, and therefore, but I'm still forced to watch to pay for the BBC.
Yeah. You're a journalist and you do it to cover off, you know, to get across the story. Totally understandable, but that's just the price you have to pay. But for those who want to somehow register the disappointment or, you know, vitriol of what, you know, the Director General and the fact that, as Rod just said, he said, wrong quote, and I quoted, he said, wrongly edited, close quote. Wrongly edited. What's the difference? He called it wrong. How about deliberately? How about
54, two statements, 54 minutes apart. That was a completely deliberate act.
You can't say that's wrong. It's like, oh, I just slipped up. I didn't mean to do it. Yes, it was deliberate act of fraud. That's why it's such a big deal. So, yeah, no, I think that the fact that, you know, in any other walk of life, whether it's filing your accounts to HMRC, you'd be done for fraud. The fact they should get £500,000 salary galls me so much like it does you. I just can't believe it. This can't be the end. This has got to be the beginning of the lasting of the blob, I'm afraid. The beginning, you know, it's not the end. This is just the beginning, I hope.
So do I. I really do think, but I have no expectation this is going to end well for the BBC. But there we are. Tarquin, thank you for that. Andrew is in Hertfordshire, wants to have his say. Hello, Andrew.
Good morning.
Morning.
Jack, to have you back. Great to have you back.
Very kind of you, sir.
The thing is, that's very interesting, is that Gibb that's on the board is obviously from GB News.
Robbie Gibb, yeah, because he's been involved. Yeah, he was a Conservative. He's been involved at lots of different levels and lots of different things.
Yeah, so if we just cut the bloke a break, perhaps he's the only grown-up in the room, because he comes from your background in relation to the way you present news, you do it factually and then you have a discussion. The BBC, the news is less about facts and more about dragging on Jeremy Bowen or someone else. BBC Verify has to go. Finished. It's not there. That's marking your own homework. Yeah. And they're normally marking other people's homework and ignoring their own. Yeah, fair dues. And then the bit that's really scary, Panorama. Yeah. If you look at News International and the phone scandal, it's gone. You know, News of the World is gone. Panorama is done. Those policemen, not defending them, how was that edited? How? And you look back...
We've seen a number of Met police officers at Charing Cross Station who have been sacked because of what was found out in secret whistleblowing videos,
Yeah, and then you start to think to yourself, how deep is that cancer within that programme and the BBC? And it's untrustworthy now.
Yeah.
That's the bit. And this morning, Robinson's arrogance was off the scale.
Nick Robinson did. I mean, I've got it printed out. He did two pages monologue about the BBC, saying it was factual. It wasn't. It was all opinion.
But the bit that was most scary was at the end. He said, and you know, in his sanctimonious voice, there was not one single complaint. Well, if the public believed that the BBC was telling the truth, why would they complain?
But also the fact that this went out in 2024, before the election, and apparently the BBC board was only made aware of it in, I think, May this year, and we're only made aware of it in the last week. I mean, again, people just assumed. Why would anyone be sitting there going, well, obviously they're splicing this together? I mean, you'd have to be very eagle-eyed and to known the speech that Donald Trump gave off by heart to have spotted that. And that's why they did it. That's why they got away with it for so long.
How can we get to a point where the national broadcaster doesn't accept that a man is a man and a woman's a woman?
Thank you. There we are. I mean, that's it. And well, mind you, we have a Prime Minister who didn't accept that, and I'm not sure still does either. Andrew, thank you for that call. Brilliant stuff. Going to take a quick break. Up next, going to talk to Conservative peer, founder of the Free Speech Union. That's Lord Young. We're going to be talking about Tim Davie and Deborah Furness quitting the BBC, but also a judge in an employment tribunal ruling that we do have a right in this country to criticise Islam. It's protected under British law. Well, when are we allowed to exercise it then? That's up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 11:39 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's get straight to my next guest. Lord Young, who's a Conservative peer and also founder of the Free Speech Union, joins us to talk about not just the BBC, but also our right to criticise certain religions. Very good morning to you, Lord Young.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with the BBC. We've got to, have we not? Front page of pretty much every newspaper. It's leading all the stories on all the media, including, interestingly, the BBC. My God, they love to talk about themselves, do they not? Tim Davie and Deborah Furness leaving the BBC, insisting, though, Deborah Furness arriving at the offices today, no doubt to clear her desk out, saying that the BBC is not institutionally biased. This after this splicing together of two parts, 54 minutes apart, of Donald Trump's speech back in January 2021 ahead of the January 6th riots, but also, of course, lots of criticism over their coverage of Gaza and pretty much everything else. Were they right to go, and what does this change, if anything?
I think they were right to go, and whether it changes anything, I guess, depends on who replaces them. I think they both are evidently reluctant to go, feel they need to do it for optical reasons and because it's the honourable thing, but judging from their resignation statements and what we know they've said in private and even in public to some journalists, they clearly don't accept that there is a problem of political bias at the heart of the BBC's news coverage. We've yet to see the chairman of the BBC's statement. It was supposed to come this morning, but I don't think it's come yet.
Don't think it's been agreed yet, is probably why.
Hasn't even been agreed yet. We can hope, Julia, that there's a bit more humility and acceptance of the problem in the chairman's statement. And that's critical because, you know, it's the board of the BBC that will appoint Tim Davies' successor, and Tim Davies' successor will appoint, the new head of news. So I think it's all to play for. But ultimately, from the point of view of those of us who've been raising the alarm about the BBC's political bias, I think it's good news.
Well, this is it. I mean, Free Speech Union spent a lot of time trying to make sure that people aren't sacked for expressing their views. But of course, interestingly, at the BBC, people are required by their contracts, hi Gary Lineker, to not express their personal views and not bring them to work and to present, in the area of news as facts. Now, of course, you know as well as I do, you've worked as a journalist for a very long time as well, that actually just your choice of subjects, when I put together my show and say, look, should we talk about this, should we do this, my interests, the things that I think are important, that my team think are important, is going to actually impact what we're going to cover. So there's no doubt at all that, the obsession with climate change hysteria, drag queens. I mean, literally, the BBC is obsessed with drag queens. Their focus in every conversation about welfare on the plight of welfare recipients as opposed to the plight of the taxpayers paying for them, their views on immigration. The way they cover those stories is inevitably going to be impacted by their personal views. Is that a problem in itself?
I think it wouldn't be a problem if the BBC wasn't funded by the licence payer. It's not a problem in other commercial news organisations, newspapers like The Telegraph, The Times, The Guardian. We all accept that they have a particular point of view. We don't expect their coverage of politics to be impartial. We know what their views are going in. The reason the BBC is different is because it's funded by the licence payer. If you own a television set and you want to receive live television signals, even if you don't watch the BBC, you have to pay the licence fee. And I think that means the BBC has an obligation to be politically unbiased, to be balanced and impartial when covering issues like climate change. I mean, it's just inexcusable that the BBC's taken a succession of editorial policy decisions that they don't have to give equal weight to both sides in the climate change debate. I mean, that may have made a kind of sense, when it was first made, in 2011 and then ratified in 2018, because then the two main political parties were the uniparty when it came to environmental and energy policy. So you could be one-sided without being partisan, as it were. But now, with both Reform and the Conservatives taking a profoundly different position to that of the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, the Greens, to affirm the latter's position and deride the former's is to be partisan, and it's totally unacceptable now.
What about the view that, and I've heard senior BBC people say this, we get criticised from all sides, so we can't be doing anything wrong. If some people think we're pro-Tory and pro-Reform, and some people think we're right on Labour and Jeremy Corbyn, and some people think we're pro-Israel, some people think we're pro-Gaza, if that's what they think, then we must be doing it right.
Yeah, the BBC are constantly trotting out this argument. It's feeble, I think. I mean, clearly, when one side accuse the BBC of bias, they're wrong, and when the other side accuse them of it, they're right. I mean, take the...
It's the evidence you use to back up your statement, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the BBC's coverage of the Israel-Hamas conflict, it's clearly been one-sided. The accusations of people like Owen Jones that it's captured by the Jewish lobby, it's just completely absurd. I mean, it's clearly biased on one side in that particular conflict, and the fact that both sides accuse the BBC of bias doesn't mean that one side isn't right.
It is quite bizarre, isn't it? And what do you make also? I mean, it's something we talked a lot about, a lot of the cases that you bring at the Free Speech Union, protecting people's rights to express. We call this gender critical beliefs. No, to express the biological fact that men are not women, women are not men, and they cannot change their sex. There is nothing controversial about this view whatsoever. Although that is one of the things that you will actually get discipline for at the BBC if you're Martin Crox, or saying it's pregnant women, not pregnant people, or if you're Justin Webb and saying a trans woman is a biological male, then you get disciplined. But making up something completely about from Hamas officials about Gaza, that's absolutely fine apparently. But apparently one of the things that's come out in this report is that some of the younger folk at the BBC, we've had this problem, a lot of us in many of the offices we've worked in, they are of the view that they shouldn't interview people like J.K. Rowling, one of the most successful successful writers of her generation, one of the biggest sort of soft power exports this country's ever had, certainly in the last 100 years. And they don't think she should be interviewed on the BBC because of her, quote, problematic, unquote, views on trans and women.
I mean, this is probably, I think, the most egregious example of the BBC's woke bias. And it's a hotly contested field. Absolutely extraordinary. I rewatched this morning, Julia, the clip of Professor Robert Winston, on Question Time, stating what was until 5 minutes ago an incontestable biological fact, which is that sex is binary. It's imprinted on us across our biology, and to claim that you can change sex is just biological nonsense. I mean, he set out what was, until 5 minutes ago, a completely uncontroversial view. He's an incredibly distinguished biologist. He does know what he's talking about. And Fiona Bruce had to caveat what he said by saying, well, of course, many people would profoundly disagree with you, Professor Winston. It's like, well, yeah, maybe they would, but they're idiots.
Yeah.
But she felt obliged.
Some people think that up is down.
It's almost like the BBC has to give equal time to flat earthers when, telling you about the weather. Yep. One thing that's been overlooked in this discussion about the collapsing public trust in the BBC, Julia, is I think that it really started to go wrong for the BBC because of its coverage of the government's response to the pandemic. You and I were in quite a small minority back then in objecting to the way the BBC and other mainstream media legacy organisations covered the pandemic. But it was, to anyone with a grasp of the facts, completely one-sided. It was just night after night of what we called COVID porn, trying to shock people into complying with the government's ludicrous kind of social distancing gobbledygook arrangements. That's when I really began to lose confidence in the BBC, when I saw just how one-sided, just how partial its coverage of that incredibly important issue was. And had it been a bit less one-sided, had they allowed people who were sceptics about the government's pandemic response to have more of a platform, maybe those disastrous measures would have been lifted a bit more quickly.
And indeed,
close schools for
I got BBC verified. I got BBC fact-checked over something I said, which of course was completely factually based, and therefore that's why they queried it. I must ask you about, before we had these resignations, about another big story, and this is very much up your strasse at the Free Speech Union. And this is a man called Patrick Lee, who was found guilty of misconduct by the Institute of Faculty of Actuaries last April over posts that he'd written on X. A 4-year disciplinary process, and we know the punishment is the process. He was banned from the professional body, ordered to pay nearly £23,000 in costs because they ruled that 42 of his posts that criticised Islam, calling the Prophet Muhammad a monster, etc., were either offensive or inflammatory or both, and were designed to demean or insult Muslims and therefore unacceptable. But, wonderfully, a judge has ruled that he's allowed to say what he wants about Islam. Explain how significant this ruling is for not just Patrick Lee, but the rest of us.
Yeah, I think this is hugely significant, Julia. Congratulations to Patrick Lee and his legal team for winning this landmark victory. It could be as significant as Maya Forstatter's victory in the Employment Appeals Tribunal. The judge has ruled that Patrick Lee's criticisms of Islam, in some cases quite robust criticisms of Islam, are protected under the Equality Act. That is to say, he cannot be discriminated against either by a regulator, which was the respondent in this case, or by an employer or by a university for robustly criticising Islam. And that is huge. And I think one of the implications of this judgment, I mean, there's going to be a second phase, and the Free Speech Union is funding the second phase of the case, in which the tribunal is going to determine whether his manifestation of that now protected belief was appropriate. Did he go too far?
So the principle is established, but in practice, did he stick
to the principle has been established, and I think that has far-reaching implications for the government's efforts to try and define Islamophobia, roll out that official state-approved definition across public bodies, and try and prohibit criticism of Islam. If, as the Employment Tribunal has now said, criticism of Islam is protected by the Equality Act, well, it's hard to imagine what kind of criticism this new definition could prohibit without falling foul of the Equality Act. So I very much hope that Steve Reed, the Community Secretary, who has to decide whether to roll out this definition, I hope he absorbs this judgment and realises that now, this project of the government's has been holed below the waterline and they should abandon it.
Well, fingers crossed, but I'm not holding out too much hope. Lord Young, founder of the Free Speech Union, thank you very much indeed. 11:51 is the time. This is Talk.
Our national broadcaster, Nigel, that quite rightly we can say is no longer impartial and there is institutional bias.
Trump is just really the final straw, isn't it? And by the way, I did speak to the president on Friday, and I can't even tell you how angry he was. As he said, is this how you treat allies? I mean, it's a very strong point. It's a very strong point, isn't it? I mean, without America, we are basically defenceless. And to be stitched up by our national broadcaster, really, he was very, very angry.
Big news coming this December. Our Talk TV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the Talk TV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
morning. Welcome back to the show. 11:55 is the time. As I said, I'm on terrible on my timing, so I'm going to go straight to my next guest. Danny Shaw is a policing, crime and justice commentator and is so patiently waiting on the line. Danny, I hugely apologise for being so late. We're going to get straight into it. While I've been away, we've had a ridiculous number of stories about manhunts for prisoners who've absconded, and now we've got another one, haven't we? Tell us all about it.
This is a Palestine Action protester who was temporarily freed from Wandsworth prison. He was allowed out on bail to attend his brother's wedding.
As you do.
Sean Middleborough, 32. He's wanted allegedly over the London Stock Exchange plot to disrupt the stock exchange. So quite serious allegations that he's facing. Hasn't had a trial, so he's not guilty, but he is being held at Wandsworth. And he hasn't returned after going to his brother's wedding. So
and we've all had those weddings, though, haven't we, Danny? We've all been to those weddings where it's all a bit confused the next day. But is this normal that I mean, a prisoner on remand would be allowed out to? I can understand a prisoner even who's convicted being allowed out for their mother's funeral or something like that, but.
I mean, I think it's done on a case-by-case basis, and they've obviously judged that perhaps this was something that had been in the diary for months and months and months. He's on remand, and they assessed the risks of it and decided to allow him to do it. It does happen. It also happens that some prisoners who are let out on what's called temporary leave, release on temporary license to go to family events and so on. Some of them, most people return. Most people come back to the prison at the allotted time, and some of them don't. It's enough. Look, here's the thing, Julia. When you have prison scandals like we've had in the past couple of weeks, then all of the other things that go wrong we don't really feature, we don't hear about very much,
even though they happen every day.
get highlighted and get more coverage and more publicity. So it's not that these things are suddenly happening, they didn't happen before. They've always happened. We're just hearing about them more.
I mean, we've heard an awful lot about the last few weeks, and of course, then we had, Calamity Lammy, as he's been nicknamed now, David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, and of course, Deputy Prime Minister at PMQ's standing in for Keir Starmer last week. Never hear Keir. Get everyone's nicknames in, and basically, pretending he didn't know about one particular abscondment, but he did. But we've also got a bit of a showdown heading with Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, and David Lammy over prison staffs, haven't we?
Yes, because the Home Office is introducing much tighter rules around immigration, which is raising the salary level that you need to be earning in order to come to the UK on a skilled visa. Now, I think all of us would agree that immigration levels were too high. We were relying far too much on workers from overseas to plug gaps and vacancies in the UK. But so the levels have been raised to try and bring down the numbers and reduce Britain's reliance on overseas labour. Flip side of that is there are going to be some occupations and professions that are going to really struggle, and one of those is prison officers, because there are a large number of prison guards that I think came from Nigeria, I think Ghana as well.
Yeah.
And now maybe underneath that earnings threshold.
Yeah. And of course, we've got a shortage of prison officers, and we know that's one of the reasons why I've been recruiting from abroad. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about that story again in the future, and I promise I will leave more time for it. Danny Shaw, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a quick break, get to the news, then we're going to be talking to former Security Minister Tom Tugendhat. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. It's 2 minutes past 12 o'clock. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. We are not institutionally biased. Oh, no, not me. I'm definitely biased. Maybe not institutionally, but definitely biased, because all of my biases are not unconscious. Very, very, very conscious, because they're based on facts as I know them, as I understand them. And when new facts come in, I change my view, whether it's on things like lockdown or climate change or anything, Brexit, anything like that. I do change my views based on the facts, but it's difficult to know what the facts are, because you'd think that having a trusted broadcaster paid for by the state under penalty of going to prison if you don't pay the fine, if you don't pay for your licence fee, you'd think that the BBC would be a place we could get the facts, and yet we can't. And yet the BBC is now facing its worst crisis more than a decade after both the Director General, Tim Davie, and its Head of News, Deborah Turness, quit last night over revelations about bias at the broadcast. Well, they've been picked up by Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader. He's been given a speech today at press conference about Reform being the party of small business, and governments only listen to big business, which is certainly the case. CBI gets far more say than, to say, the Federation of Small Businesses, even though they represent far more people, not just businesses, but also far more employees. But Nigel Farage was asked about his reaction to Donald Trump's response to the BBC story, where, let's face it, quite a lot of glee from Donald Trump. He posted on Truth Social saying that to slam Tim Davie, saying that top people at the BBC are all quitting or fired because they were caught doctoring my very good, perfect speech of January the 6th. Well, that's the specific last straw that caused those departures, but we've had an awful lot of problems over the last 5 years, non-stop, I would say, this year, certainly in terms of coverage of Gaza and over other issues as well. But Nigel Farage, when asked for his reaction to the story, and particularly Donald Trump's response, he said, if I was the President of the United States of America and I'd been stitched up on the eve of a national election, and he says, look, what the BBC did was election interference. He said quite clearly he believes the BBC has been biased for decades. He says the BBC has been institutionally biased for decades, and he said coverage of issues like Europe, migration, net zero, the climate and Gaza, and the coverage of Trump had been biased as well. And he said he spoke to the President on Friday, and he said, he just said to me, is this how you treat your best ally? Quite a powerful comment, he says. We're going to be talking about all of that. We're going to talk to Tom Tugendhat, the Conservative MP and former Security Minister, in a few moments. Also, in the next half hour, I'm going to talk to a former BBC executive, Danny Cohen. He's now a columnist at The Telegraph, which, of course, broke the big story, this internal report that basically no action was taken on whatsoever until, of course, it went to the front page of The Telegraph. But let me bring in Benedict Spence. He's a Conservative commentator joining us throughout the show. Benedict and his Movember tash, which I like to say is rather impressive. It doesn't at all, as I say, look like a 70s porn star or a member of a Mexican drug cartel, as we have often said on many a November before. Don't roll your eyes. You know that's the stuff you come in for.
This moustache is what gives me the impartiality. You know that this comes with
It is the giver of impartiality.
Absolutely.
What do you reckon of what Nigel Farage has had to say? That the BBC, that it was blatant. It was basically, it was election interference, and that the BBC is institutionally biased.
Oh, OK. Election interference, I possibly wouldn't go that far. I understand that Nigel Farage is going to try and make hay out of this. He's good friends with Donald Trump, actually. You know, we need to remember that, and he's always going to use this as an opportunity to bolster and also take a pot shot. Institutionally biased, I think there's more and more evidence of that sort of thing, certainly on Donald Trump, because I think it's been easy to be institutionally biased against Donald Trump, because he's not really our problem. He sort of is, but sort of isn't.
Would that have influenced, would what the BBC have written influence the American election?
I doubt it. Put it this way, I doubt the average Republican voter cares two hoots what the BBC or anybody in the UK, frankly, has to say. I think they're very sort of focused, single-minded on what sort of news sources they listen to. So I doubt you can say it's election interference. But bias, yes. I think very clearly there is bias. Certainly there was a lot of bias against Donald Trump because it was cheap and it was easy to do and you could get a laugh out of it, and a lot of people in the corporation thought that he was a fascist and ghastly and all that sort of thing. Elsewhere, I also think on things like the trans issue and Gaza to a certain extent as well, we have begun to see what you could say is certainly a pattern of behaviour that you could put down as, yeah, there's something not quite right there, is there? So that's on 3 things that I think that's too much to just go, oh, that's a coincidence.
These aren't one-offs. And again, the fact that the people who resigned are talking about this mistake, in inverted commas, about the documentary, the Panorama documentary about the US election, went out just before the election, November 2024. But it included this footage from January the 6th, 2021, this speech that Donald Trump made. It's not a mistake when you splice together 2 comments as if they were made seamlessly together when they are 54 minutes apart. You don't it's not possible to accidentally do that. And the fact that no one noticed it, and then months later there was a report into it, and then nothing was done and no one did anything. And as far as we're aware, there's been no action and no, frankly, no heads have rolled. And now it's the senior people for their failure. Well, let's face it, they've covered it up. That's what they've done. It's always the cover up that does it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk and your message to 87222. You can get in touch at Talk TV. Calls are charged the national rate. Text costs 1. Standard network rate message. We're going to get to more of your calls coming in thick and fast, I promise you, in the next 50 minutes or so. Let's talk now to Tom Tugendhat. He's a Conservative MP. He's also a former Security Minister and joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Tom.
Julia, how are you? I feel I'm missing moustache. I'm so sorry. I'm not taking drugs for a cartel.
Don't worry.
Well, what are you doing?
I'm sure I could give you a run for your money, but there we are. Look, let's go straight to the heart of the matter. Do you agree with Nigel Farage that this was election interference and that the BBC has been institutionally biased for decades?
What I think it is I think it's extremely poor editorial judgment. I think it's extremely demonstrative of one view of diversity, which is only in identity, not in thought. And it's very sadly demonstrating an institution that has got high on its own supply, if you like, and has, to continue the drugs metaphor, and has forgotten that actually what it should be doing is representing the whole of the United Kingdom and therefore being entirely factual. I mean, frankly, there are quite a lot of bits of this story that the Telegraph has, let's be honest, done us all a huge favour in reporting. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, the most egregious is the Donald Trump one. Not because it would have affected the election. It came out a long time after the election. And so, the idea that it would have had any significant effect in the United States, I don't think is credible. But because it is just flagrantly dishonest. It's just not true. And if you're setting up organisations like BBC Verify, or if you're claiming that the role of the BBC is to be a sort of nation shall speak peace unto nation, which is their motto, then you have to be honest. And I'm afraid the BBC quite clearly was not honest.
Well, this is you talk about a poor editorial judgment. Can you excuse putting Bob Vylan, carry him the singer shouting, death to the IDF and effing anti-Semitism, and effing anti-Semitism, not anti-Semitism, effing whichever he was talking about at the time. Putting that and leaving that on the live feed for hours and hours and end. Is it poor editorial judgment to pay the son of a Hamas official to front a document? Is it poor editorial judgment to not interview J.K. Rowling because of her apparently problematic views on knowing basic biology about men and women? Is it poor editorial judgment, any of that? Because it seemed, and even to splice together those 2 bits of excerpts from Donald Trump's speech, those are deliberate acts of, I would say, sort of sabotage of the truth.
Right. So sorry, forgive me. Let me be clear what I meant by poor editorial judgment. I didn't mean that those were. I meant that the overall editors of the BBC are clearly, were, let's see who's in charge now, were clearly not keeping a proper judgment over who made up their teams. Within the teams, then there was some frank dishonesty, right? So, I mentioned the Donald Trump thing, which I think is, I don't see how you defend it other than as simple dishonesty. I'm afraid I did.
With a political purpose.
I suspect actually worse than that. I don't think it was for a political purpose. I think they thought they were telling the truth. I think they, from their own perspective, think that they were revealing the real truth, if you see what I mean. Now, actually, that doesn't make it better. Actually, it makes it worse because it suggests that they didn't even realise that they were, being so quite
But
free.
do you think that's the same thing? And I suspect you may be right about this. And it's a point and a story I told a couple of hours ago on the show, a conversation I had with Tim Davie, Director General of the BBC, as was, in the summer, where I talked to him about institutional anti-Semitism at the BBC, and he was outraged by this, got really quite agitated with me. And then even though I'd said to him categorically, I don't believe that you're anti-Semitic, or that most senior people at the BBC or the staff are, I know a lot of people who work there, being old colleagues of mine over the years, are anti-Semitic, but the institutional anti-Semitism is so ingrained, they almost don't see it. They don't even know they're doing it, in the same way the bias, over Brexit and immigration and climate change. They literally don't even know it's happening. They are in a bubble that is so distinct from, mainstream opinion in this country. They don't even know they're doing it. But he then said, you're accusing me of being an anti-Semite. He tried to turn it into me making a personal accusation. But that's the thing. The reason why they're going, but I know I'm not. I know that I believe in facts. They genuinely think they're the good people.
I'm afraid you're closer to the truth there, Julia. It's not a lie in the sense that they see the truth and they choose to, tell something that they know to be untrue. It's that they think they're reinforcing what is true. And it's interesting, actually, just before, you were talking about the, I can't remember the name of the person who sang Death of the IDF in Glastonbury, which was particularly horrific, but the kneecap performance at Glastonbury was coming up, and I got in touch with a senior person at the BBC when I heard that it was going to happen, and said, look, you must be prepared that you may be about to be in breach of the Terrorism Act, because you may be about to broadcast some pro-Hamas propaganda, or some pro-Hezbollah propaganda. So can you just assure me that you've thought this through, and that, should this happen, you're ready to pull the plug or respond in a correct way? And I got a pretty sort of vacuous response saying, of course, it's up to Glastonbury who they invite, but it is, of course, up to us who we broadcast. And I said, yeah, well, yes, it is. And you are responsible for what you broadcast. And if you broadcast, material that's in breach of the Terrorism Act, then you're complicit in it, right? You've
been warned.
And you've
it's not like warned. Out of the blue, Kylie Minogue spouted these views.
No, exactly. This is somebody who had, for various reasons, the trial got dropped, but who had actually been charged by the police with the breach of the Terrorism Act, right? And I got a very vacuous response back. And so I'm forgive me, my sympathy is not really with the BBC on this one, because it's not like you ain't been warned many, many, many times that this is a serious problem.
Does it matter? Does any of this matter?
Yes,
because again, we've got this is the front page of every newspaper. It is at the moment. It's been, as far as I gather, for most of the last week. It's leading, every news, virtually all we've talked about today. The BBC are talking about it. And we know the BBC likes talking about itself anyway. Always thinks it's a news story, but doesn't like it when it's critical of it. But does it really matter what this one media organisation does?
Yes. Of course it does, Julia, and it matters for exactly the reason that you can see that the President of the United States has raised it. And because the reality is, whatever you or I or anybody else watching this show thinks of the BBC, the reality is a lot of people around the world have heard of it. What it says carries weight. People repeat it in various different ways. True or false, the repetition matters, right? And it just is true that the more noise you make about something, eventually people will start to believe it. That's how propaganda works, right? You repeat things often enough, and eventually enough people will believe it that it will have some effect. Will it change everybody's mind? Will it swing an election? Will it cause a genocide or a war, or will it end a genocide or a war? Maybe not, but it will persuade some people. So yes, it does matter, and it particularly matters because you and I are also forced to pay for it.
Yeah.
Now, not just in the sense that we have to pay the license fee, which is one thing, but also in that the BBC World Service, which I happen to believe should be a force for good in this world, has been broadcasting Muslim Brotherhood propaganda for the best part of 5-10 years. I have warned the BBC World Service about it when I was chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee. I know that other friendly Arab states have warned the BBC about this over many years. And, it is simply not acceptable that we do not have proper editorial oversight over some of these languages.
And some of the people on BBC Arabic the BBC Arabic and the BBC English channel, publishing very different things to the BBC Arabic channel, but some of the people they're using, in fact, on both channels, but particularly BBC Arabic, people who have blatantly, openly on social media, in interviews, not just taking the Palestinian side, but absolutely rejoicing in the massacre on October the 7th, supporting Hamas. I mean, such blatant stuff. These people, utterly not credible as journalistic sources, and yet being used again and again and again and again.
So I completely agree with you, and that's the most egregious. But actually, I think, if I may, the more dangerous is the subtle, where you see the same pictures broadcast on BBC World Service English, BBC World Service Arabic, exactly the same pictures. And so the editor, who doesn't speak Arabic, watches the same pictures, sees the same footage, and thinks it's the same story. Actually, the voiceover is completely different. The voiceover is totally different, with the BBC Arabic saying one thing and the BBC UK version different. Now, I mean, as you know, I speak Arabic, not so well anymore, but I can still understand what's going on. And it's really striking that I've raised this, many times in the past with BBC, and, it carries on.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, let's move on and talk from the BBC to the amazing men and women who made this conversation possible, because we live in a free country. We're not ruled by the Nazis, and there's incredible, particularly the men who died, who gave their lives at the ceremony yesterday and Remembrance Sunday. And this extraordinary interview that one of the D-Day heroes has given, he's a proud record as the country's oldest poppy seller. This is Alec Penston. And he has said that the sacrifice of the lost men of his generation wasn't worse what the country has become, and says the UK has gone to rack and ruin. As an ex-military man yourself, what do you make of his comments?
So, forgive me, I lost friends in Iraq and Afghanistan, and very sadly I've lost friends since then, people who never quite recovered in different ways. And I don't think it's really odd, because I don't think their sacrifice was worth it, right? I mean, I'd give anything to have them back. That's not what I mean by worth it. But do I think the alternative to having fought in France and Germany, or having defended Britain's interests around the world in the last 20 years that I was soldiering? No, I think the alternative is worse. The alternative of speaking German or being ruled by the Nazis, or, seeing terrorism flourish in Afghanistan, I think that's worse. Do I think it's worth it that we've lost our friend? No. The word worth doesn't really work for me, if you see what I mean. It's not. Mm-hmm. It's not a question of being worth it. And I understand. Look, I mean, of course, I can't understand in the same way. I didn't lose as many friends as he did, and I didn't serve in Normandy and all the rest of it. So I'm not. Don't get me wrong, I'm not making an equivalence on that basis. But do I think, am I grateful they fought? Yeah, God, I am, yes. Absolutely. 1,000 times I'm grateful. Because I understand why he doesn't think it's worth it. I really do. And if you want to, I mean, you and I, Julia, we've agreed on far too many things already this morning. But, do I think that things are going awry in various different ways? Of course I do. But do I think the alternative of being ruled by Nazis is just horrific? Yeah, it's absolutely horrific. I'm eternally grateful for the extraordinary courage and sacrifice of those people.
I think we all say amen to that. We'll leave it there. I so appreciate you joining us. Tom Toogan, Hacksett MP, former military man, of course, and former security minister. Benedict Spence, we'll come back to what we said to say at the BBC, but in terms of what this D-Day veteran, Alex Penston, has said, I mean, it's very, very damning. And we often talk about, the fact that we're able to even have these conversations and we can debate all these things, on air. We can have rival media and criticism, and people are forced to resign. And these are all as a result of living in a largely free democracy. Basically, faulty as it is, we are nevertheless living in one of the best places in the world to be alive at the best time to be alive. And that's down to those men. That's down to those men.
One of the best places, yes. Free democracy, no. Let's be clear about that. It's not a free democracy. And also, one of the things that really sort of winds me up about talking about remembrance is the sheer number of people who died unnecessarily. Yes, they sacrificed themselves. Let's be very clear here. The Second World War was very avoidable. The First World War was entirely avoidable. And this is why when we talk about things like Ukraine... because they were done why they happened because of stupid political decisions. And this is why when I look at things like Ukraine, for instance, and I think even that war was entirely avoidable. And actually, if
we'd made it clear that we would back Ukraine, Russia wouldn't have invaded, 100%.
Exactly. And
I think you and I discussed it at the time.
These great European conflicts and other conflicts around the world as well, they happen, yes, people sacrifice themselves, they do so bravely. But let's be clear here. Politicians throw generations of young men, and I'm not interested in people who say, oh, but what about the women, all this something. It is young men who are thrown into the meat grinder over and over again. So whilst we should remember their sacrifice, for the love of God, can we stop thinking about it in terms of this is something that brave men should do? No. Brave politicians, sensible politicians, should avoid us getting into these, and that means making difficult decisions. That means not neglecting things like defence or energy policy. It means not by giving in to people domestically saying, of course, we can spend all this money on all this nice stuff that'll make us weaker in the long term. Actually avoiding people being blown up in trenches like they are being done in Ukraine right now requires strength and fortitude, and I fear, again, our political class does not have that right
Once again, the willingness and the ability to fight a war and to win it is what prevents
it is the best
wars.
deterrent.
It is Russia wouldn't have invaded. Russia, the red line that Obama drew in Syria that he then left basically said to Russia, off you go. The West is now weak. There needs to be serious measures. I mean, again, I wish Donald Trump would be stronger on Ukraine, as strong as he's been on Israel at times. And we're gonna be facing that with China. We're going to be facing that with terrorist forces as well. The willingness to fight and to do what is necessary, and yes, at times with absolute foul brutality. Yes. That, unfortunately, is reality. And then you're called a warmonger, whereas actually what you're hoping you're going to do is save lives in the long run. Waving white pieces of paper,
white poppies doesn't do so much. I wear my poppy with absolute pride, I have to say. And whatever this D-Day hero Alex Penston thinks, he's been there, I haven't. I'm an armchair general. I don't count. He does what he's done and what his friends did, his comrades in arms did. I am absolutely grateful for every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day, of every year of my life, because our lives would not be like that if it wasn't for those men and their sacrifice. But as you're right in saying, we shouldn't have to put men in that position to make that sacrifice. 12:24 is the time. We're going to take a break. We've got lots of calls all about the BBC. What a surprise. Do you want it reformed? Do you want it scrapped? Does anything change after his resignations? That's up next. This is Talk.
our national broadcaster, Nigel, that quite rightly we can say is no longer impartial, and there is institutional bias.
Trump is just really the final straw, isn't it? And by the way, I mean, I did speak to the president on Friday, and I can't even tell you how angry he was. As he said, is this how you treat allies? I mean, it's a very strong point. It's a very strong point, isn't it? I mean, you know, without America, we are basically defenseless. And to be stitched up by our national broadcaster, really, he was very, very angry.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. 12:27 is the time. Well, the chairman of the BBC, Samir Shah, his letter written to the Culture Select Committee in the Commons has just been published. It's writing to MPs, basically making clear about the concerns about particularly this report from Michael Prescott. This is the whistleblower, former internal BBC man, former political journalist actually for the Sunday Times many years ago. He was giving his full response to that, and Samir Shah has said in the letter the corporation would like to apologise, he says, for the error of judgment over the editing of the speech by Donald Trump for Panorama. Oh, mate, I mean, I'm sorry, end of the week, Samir Shah, you're gone, mate. I mean, seriously, it's not an error of judgment. It's absolute outrageous political bias and unacceptable and not journalistic. I just find it absolutely extraordinary. They're still calling it error of judgment and a mistake. Benedict Spence, your response?
I think that sort of, as you say, just sort of sums up the slightly sort of blinkered view of actually what's going on here. And they need there is a window in which they can reverse this, that they can fix this. The BBC needs some humility and it needs some clarity. Ironically, it needs clarity about these sorts of things. Yeah. You can win back public trust. You can win back political trust. You have all the resources that we're giving you to do this. You cannot continue down the line of, oh, there are nefarious right-wing forces trying to bring down the BBC and we just need to keep on upsetting everybody because that shows we're doing our job. That's not what's going on here. This is far more fundamental than that. It
really is. It's absolutely extraordinary. Really. There we are. Well, I mean, again, Tim Davie has called it mistakes made, and the head of news who's resigned, Deborah Turner, she has said, there's not institutional bias. They absolutely don't get it. There's no doubt at all. Let's go to your calls. Ashley, he's on the line in London, has given us a call on 0344 499 1000. Afternoon to you, Ashley. What do you want to say, and what's your reaction to what the BBC chair has said, calling that Trump splicing of two different parts of the speech 54 minutes apart as an error of judgment?
It's like a scene out of Little Britain, isn't it? Really,
totally.
Everything is we learn by our mistakes. It's like a simple word that can be used that can dismiss any accountability or responsibility for decisions that were intentionally taken. Let's be clear about this. It's a bit like the school in Birmingham about adding pork to the list of things, and it's a human error. This is not a human error. This whole thing is the intent to deceive the public into believing someone said something, to incite the public's opinion to turn against a specific person. And that's the part that's so scary, because they do it with everything. And it's not every single person, not every single report, but a lot. And what needs to happen, heads do need to roll, not just two people. It needs to have a proper external investigation into who agreed what and when. Yeah. And
who knew, when, and what did they do?
Who knew, why was it allowed? Because ultimately, someone in there, if it wasn't the head person that's responsible, then someone in there is allowed to use their personal opinion to correct the narrative to what was actually meant by that statement that Donald Trump made. So, they've just shown how easy. If anyone looks at those clips, you can so clearly see why people would believe what.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very critical of Donald Trump, but he said I've never thought that he actually basically said, hey, I'll head off to the Capitol and cause a riot. But we know from even his own people behind the scenes that once there was the riot, he refused to act for many hours, even though even members of his own family were begging him to go on social media and say, stop, go home, which he could have done. So he was quite happy to delight in it. And I'm sorry, that's not Trump derangement syndrome. That is evidence from his own aides, his own family members in sworn testimony that he wasn't acting. So that is a fair criticism of him. But do I think did I ever think that he had actually deliberately tried to do that? No. But again, why did no one notice this for so long? Now, also coming back to you on this, Ashley, the BBC chair Samir Shah in this letter to the Culture Select Committee has said there have been more than 500 complaints in the publication of the memo last week by the Telegraph, raising concerns about the editing of that speech by Donald Trump. He said, "We accept that the way the speech was edited did give the impression of a direct call for violent action." It is quite extraordinary then that it was allowed to go out on air, isn't it?
Well, I mean, if I did something like that out in the street, and I'd be arrested for inciting hatred and inciting violence. I mean, so when a national broadcaster does it, you have to look at that whole situation and say they are criminally accountable for those potential actions. And words are powerful, and when you use them the wrong way, we've all seen what can happen. And I just hate the fact that they sit there smug and keep it. They're going to probably get golden handshakes to go, hide it under the table, and hope it all goes away with a little apology. And I don't think it should. I think it needs to be looked into deeper and deeper until they find out exactly what happened. Well, I've given in previous some coverage, I think it was CBS that ended up having to pay a sort of libel fee out to Donald Trump for sort of some similarly egregious coverage of things he had said. Distortions. I'd be very surprised if Donald Trump doesn't now sue the BBC. Well, I mean, serve them right. Unfortunately, it comes out of our pockets, doesn't
That's the thing, isn't it? Yeah, and my view is any payment out to Donald Trump should come out of the pensions of the people involved. It's simple as that. But there we are. Ashley, thank you very much, indeed. Great call. Let's go to Kevin, who's in North Yorkshire. Afternoon to you, Kevin.
Afternoon, Julia. Yeah, thank you for taking my call.
Oh, thank you for calling in.
No, that's great. I just wanted to say that the comment by the chair just supports really what the point I was going to make. I think decades now the BBC is recruited from the ideologically compromised youth and people from universities, and I think the point of making or trying to reform the BBC is pointless. I think their factual ignorance is only surpassed by their ideological and moral sort of lack of control, and I think they need to. It needs to be cut loose. It needs the whole thing to be let go. If they want to go and be the mouthpiece for the Guardian, let them go ahead and be it. But I think if we want a public broadcaster, then what we should do is start again afresh and set the rules aside to make sure this debacle doesn't happen.
Do you know what? I think that's where we are. I'm quite happy to have a national broadcaster and us pay for it through taxation of some kind. But it needs to be a much smaller organisation, and it needs to be very, very clearly politically neutral. And again, I don't want to agree with everything or expect to agree with everything, but I certainly think, I mean, the people they're talking about as potential, alternatives, new bosses, Director General of the BBC, are completely unsuitable. It needs to be someone who's never worked at the BBC, someone, I believe in Nigel Farage, it has to be someone from way outside, proven track record in business, but with none of that bias, and someone who will absolutely rip it up and start again.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, like I say, if we want one, maybe it's worth asking the public whether they want a public broadcast. I don't think this issue of separating the news from it is potentially a good one. I think at the end of the day, the problem we've got with wokeism throughout national television.
Oh, it's in every documentary. I mean, you can't. I haven't enjoyed a David Attenborough documentary for years. Oh, I'm going to get my lecture now, aren't I?
Absolutely, and that problem and wokeism throughout advertising is a problem which has been a recent issue. I think we need a public, if we're going to have a public, but I don't say we need one, but if we do fully decide they want one, then we need to start afresh, and we need to say these are the rules that you will abide by. There will be no bias in any form whatsoever. It will be factual from top to bottom. It will represent in it the representation of the different demographics in the population, and it will not over-represent, and all these things should be taken into account if we decide we want one.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you on all of that more. Kevin, thank you very much indeed. Just final word on that to Benedict Spence sitting in the studio with me. I mean, that's the thing. Maybe we should ask, do people still want this? Given how few people actually watch the BBC right now, given how, again, you can say, I don't watch talk, listen to talk. Yeah, but you don't have to pay for me. That's the difference.
I think the key thing is actually if it is impartial news gathering, and it's not simply for the domestic domestic consumption. Also, there are people all around the world who for decades have relied on the BBC apps where their own...
only source of
news. Absolutely. And I do think that there is a moral good, actually, as well as a soft power good. But when it comes to the entertainment side, let that compete with the Netflixes of the world. If it's if you can monetize it, actually, why then should we necessarily be paying?
Well, they do monetize it, but then they keep that money. We don't get it back.
If it can stand on its own 2 feet, let the commercial wing, let the entertainment wing of the BBC be fully commercialised. Let it compete. Let it truly sort of, be this soft power thing, and let the news gathering be a separate entity that I think we all understand we need to pay for.
Yeah. Okay, very interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Give us a call 0344991000. We'll talk to my next guest just a couple of moments. It's Danny Cohen. He's a former BBC executive who's led a lot of the criticism, particularly over the issue of the coverage of Gaza and Israel, in terms of BBC coverage. We're going to find out what he thinks up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, welcome back to the show. 12:39 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, with a home of common sense. Let's talk right now to someone who's been speaking a lot of common sense about the BBC, and someone who knows it from the inside and the outside. My next guest is Danny Cohen. He's a former BBC executive, now he's a columnist at the Telegraph. Telegraph, of course, being the newspaper that has exposed the secret of internal memo by the whistleblower Michael Prescott, which basically, told us how we'd seen that panorama documentary spliced together 2 excerpts of Donald Trump's speech on January the 6th, 2021, the day of the Capitol riots, where 54 minutes apart, to make it appear that he had basically urged his followers to actually go and use violence at the Capitol. Of course, many other egregious examples given by Michael Prescott in that report as well. We've lost the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie. We've lost the Head of News, Deborah Turness. We've now got a statement from the BBC Chair, Samir Shah, apologising for, he says, the error of judgment over the editing and accepting that the way the speech was edited did give the impression of a direct call for violent action. But is that going to be enough? Danny Cohen, what do you make of, well, both the resignations but also the apology by the BBC chair? Is that going to be enough and we all can all move on with our lives?
Well, I think it's right that Tim Davie and Deborah Turnus resigned and they've taken accountability. The Prescott report, I think, is a pretty devastating report, and I'd encourage all of your viewers and listeners to read it. It's 20 pages, which outlines not just the issue around the manipulated Trump video, but wider issues with the American election coverage, really significant issues around BBC Arabic and the presentation of Israel, and also other topics like gender ideology. It's very significant. We're starting to see people claim this is a kind of right-wing coup.
Yeah.
It's nothing of the sort. It's an attempt in the best interest of the BBC to hold it to account and to live up to its values. And I think that's what we've been trying to do. I have not had a lot of chance to look at Mr. Shah's letter, but I do note it does acknowledge and refer to underlying problems. And I think that's quite significant. He doesn't go into, he makes a defence of the BBC, as he's naturally bound to, but he does refer to underlying problems. And it would be good to understand from him what exactly he's referring to there, because he doesn't just say it's individual errors, he talks about underlying problems.
Yeah.
So I think there's a hint there that Mr. Shah recognises there's a bigger picture here.
Well, this is it. And to me, you know, the fact that we've got these two senior figures who've gone ostensibly because of this doctoring of this speech by Donald Trump, that's kind of the least of their offences, the least egregious of the crimes of the BBC. And I do think that some of this, I mean, some of the things that they have done over recent years have been morally outrageous and I would say dangerous in terms of feeding certain viewpoints, particularly anti-Semitism in this country and abroad as well, the BBC Arabic. And it's something you've been commenting on very openly since October the 7th, those attacks by Hamas on Israeli civilians, is the BBC's, I mean, outrageous coverage. My husband says, you know, I go through a variety of media in the morning to get all the different, again, I like to hear all the different viewpoints. And he says, you only listen to Radio 4, so it rile you up, so you're just shouting at it all morning. But some of the coverage on the website, the coverage, I mean, again, twice a week, we have in the report, twice a week they're having to correct reports. The outrageous taking of everything that Hamas says as just gospel truth, which is quite extraordinary. The incredibly biased reporting of this war opposed to any other war in terms of civilian deaths and the like. That is a far more dangerous and significant breach of BBC impartiality than this one speech, isn't it?
I agree with you. I agree, Julia. I mean, I think from a Jewish community perspective, the BBC and Mr. Shah actually owes the Jewish community an apology today. And I've got a very specific reason for saying that. The Prescott report shows that the BBC and its executives were in receipt of a report which showed detailed systemic bias at BBC Arabic. Yet in public, in Parliament, in private communications and meetings with members of the Jewish community, they have always denied that. And they've said it's a number of, you know, a few bad apples, and they've dealt with it.
A few odd mistakes, isn't it? And can I just clarify for people who've not read the full Michael Prescott report, which most people will not have done, is that, and the stuff that's been detailed, I mean, David Collier has been a brilliant finder of truth on this, but we're not talking about just sort of slight different use of language. Do they call Hamas terrorists or not? We are talking about not even just hiring, you know, the son of a Hamas official to front a documentary, but just blatant, outrageous use of basically Hamas spokespeople to all intents and purposes as supposedly independent journalists putting their case.
Correct. Some of whom have said horrific things about Jewish people, said things like what should happen to Jewish people is what Hitler did, celebrated the October the 7th massacre and all those kinds of things. So I feel very strongly that the fact that they had evidence of this, but they weren't straight with the Jewish community about it, is pure gaslighting, Julia. It's presenting a reality which they know not to be true. And they did that to Jewish community over the last 2 years.
But they talk about, you know, mistakes, errors of judgment and things like that. These aren't like even, you know, splicing the documentary, it's about splicing the speech together for the Panorama documentary, choosing to have somebody who, presenting a documentary or interviewed, who a cursory check of their social media will show that on October the 7th, they were celebrating the murder and rape of Jews. Now, I mean, that's not an error of judgment, is it, or a mistake?
No, it's not. It's not.
So what does it tell us?
By the way, one of the things the Prescott report shows is that two of those reporters, one of them appeared 500 plus times on BBC Arabic. The other one appeared over 200 times on the service. So this is not people who are kind of eyewitnesses. These were people they were using on an almost daily basis to report on the war who were clearly biased. And that is not within the values that we all expect of the BBC.
So what is it then? Because we've had Deborah Turner, she turned up at the BBC today, hopefully to clear her desk. Bye-bye, good riddance, I'd say. And she's saying there is no institutional bias at the BBC, whether that's about Trump or anything else. There's no institutional bias at the BBC.
I think that BBC is, it shows a culture of denial. I think this is actually a really big opportunity for the BBC, because if the BBC can look this evidence in the face, and it can recognise that it has some issues with groupthink and systemic bias and institutional bias, then actually it can make itself fit for the future. If it continues to keep its head in the sand and keep pretending there are no issues, then I'm afraid the BBC is going to have a rougher and rougher time.
And this is it, because Nick Robinson on the BBC this morning did a long sort of, monologue, and he's written some tweets and made some comments in the last few days, basically saying, look, there are conspiracies against us internally and externally. But I was arguing, a couple of hours ago on the show that actually the only enemies of the BBC that really count and are really doing the damage are those within the BBC who are committing these egregious crimes against journalism, and B, covering them up, and C, denying they're even happening.
Yeah, listen, I agree. And I think journalists like Mr. Robinson need to be careful about impartiality. They're commenting on this story and they're the subject of the story.
And I've got a lot of time for that. I think Nick was probably the best, one of the best BBC political editors we had.
Yeah.
I think he's a brilliant presenter. I genuinely like him as a person. But the problem is that he, like so many of us, they are just caught up completely in this bubble where they don't even know what they're doing.
That's right. They can't see it.
Why not?
I don't know, and I can't understand how you couldn't read the Prescott report and think, okay, we've got some issues here. Let's be open and address them. And yet they don't. And again, it's not just the Trump speech. It's not just Gaza. It's trans. I mean, literally obsessed with drag queens. Literally obsessed. Brexit. Let's face it. We all knew which side they were on. We know when there's a conversation about tax and welfare, we know what side they're on. Immigration. We know what side they're on. Climate change. I know the BBC's views on everything. And yet I shouldn't know that the BBC shouldn't have a view on anything. No, you should know. You should know, because you should feel that both sides are fairly represented. How do we get back to that? Do we need? I mean, look, the Director General isn't going to make a difference, is it? I think it needs a really open, long-term dialogue within the BBC, within BBC News, and try and make people understand that for the sake of the BBC, we need them to be more open and to break out of this groupthink. Do you think they can do that? See, I don't think you need a dialogue. I think people need to be told, you need to stop doing this or you're sacked. Yeah, I agree. Only time will tell, and we need strong leadership. I must forgive me. I must go. I know. I've just realised I was only supposed to keep you till 40. I do apologise. Danny Cohen, come back on again. Great to hear from you. Benedict Spence, do you think the BBC survives this long term? Oh, I think it does survive it long term. I think that the institution itself is too large. There are too many vested interests. But I think to make its life easier, it does have to change. And I think that if there is enough pressure politically and from the public, it will change. I do hold out hope that it can happen, but it does need to be strong-armed. Probably going to involve people not paying their licence fee. It will involve pain for the BBC. It will involve actual protest and people making it clear that they won't just put up with it. But that's how political change is enacted, I suppose. Well, we're going to talk to Taxpayers Alliance up next, actually about other taxpayers' ways, but I wonder if they've also got a view on the BBC, because it is a tax. Licence fee is a tax, is it not? We're going to go to a quick break and come back with that in just a couple of moments. This is Talk.
Big news coming this December. Our Talk TV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the Talk TV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, welcome back to the show. 12:53 is about to be the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Benedict Spence still here. Ian Collins is going to be here just a couple of moments. Tell us what's happening on his show. Just some breaking news for you. By the way, this is some earlier breaking news. The International Olympic Committee is set to announce a ban on transgender women in female competition next year, ahead of the next Olympics. No, you're banning men from women's sport. That's what you're doing. Call it what it is, banning men from women's sport. I know that we'll talk more about that on the show tomorrow. But also some other breaking news, and we knew this was happening. We knew this was going to come. Another migrant sent to France under the government's one-in, one-out deal. You know, that really successful, brilliant little exchange scheme we've got with France. That migrant, yeah, you guessed it, he's returned to the UK. But don't worry, the Home Office said he's going to be returned to France as quickly as possible. So that's all right then. We are a joke country with a joke national broadcaster. There's that summary of the day for you. Right now, let's talk to Callum McGoldrick. He's a researcher at the Taxpayers Alliance and joins us to talk about taxpayers' waste. Well, what a day to talk about that, Callum. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Julia. Thank you for having me on.
We weren't planning to talk about the BBC with you, but I've got to ask you quick thoughts because, at the end of the day, the licence fee is a substantial tax on the British people, isn't it? Is that good value for money, do you reckon?
Absolutely not. The TV licence fee should be scrapped. It's a tax on watching TV, and I think it's been proven again. It's something we already knew, but the BBC very often fails to actually be an impartial broadcaster, and the fact that they can demand a tax to watch other channels is just not fair.
It is quite bizarre, isn't it? You think if you're getting a special service from them, this neutral, wonderful, unbiased, uninstitutionally biased, apparently, news, then that's one thing. But I think we all know we're not getting that anymore.
No, we're not. I think this is just the latest round of failings. I think 2021 was the first time Tim Davies' directorship was called into question with editorial failings. It's been going on for years.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to matter who's in the job, they always seem to fail. Let me ask you also about this extraordinary revelation. Again, I don't know why I'm shocked by any of these things anymore. Apparently the British public is footing a £20 million bill to train tax collectors. And you might think, well, yes, obviously we have to train tax collectors, except for some reason we're training tax collectors in Ethiopia. What?
Yeah, the scheme is actually even more ridiculous than this. It's to make Ethiopia's tax system more competitive for businesses. I don't think anyone's told the Foreign Office that we have the longest and most complex tax code in the world. So perhaps the Treasury would be a better recipient of that money.
Yeah, maybe we could train them up and then they could train our people up.
Well, yeah, it's obviously just sort of a big Ponzi scheme, a way to give money away to various sort of politicians and friendly.
But why? I don't understand why. It's funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, OK, but why on earth? They say it's going to help Ethiopia raise more revenue so it can become less dependent on aid. I don't see why that's my problem.
Yeah, it's not our responsibility at all. It's part of a 15 billion aid package that we give away annually. This is just the 20 million that's going to Ethiopia for just this one scheme. And you think, yeah, I don't see how British taxpayers are ever going to receive a return on this.
Also, by the way, that's a heck of a lot of tax collectors.
It is, and the scheme has actually done supposedly a good job at training them up. But like you said, HMRC is a disaster here.
I should study Home Safe for 20 million quid. This is a smaller sum of money, but this will also irk people. Yet another debt-ridden Labour council, Blackpool Council, where I've been to Blackpool many a time at party conference. They've got a lot of problems there. They've spent £35,000 on rainbow road crossings to celebrate, quote, the long-established LGBTQ plus history and diversity of the Lancashire seaside town. 35 grand on a painting of zebra crossing in the colours of the pride flag.
Yeah, it's just another example of council busybodies pursuing their own hobby horses, using taxpayers' money to foot the bill for that. As at Blackpool, this is the latest example, but we know it happens up and down the country.
Yeah. But also, I mean, what paint? Are they getting all the paint from Farrow and Ball?
Well, there must be some pretty big zebra crossings, or at least an awful lot of them. I don't know how they rack up that much money.
But also, I mean, it's a small point worth making, but one of the things about zebra crossing is they're really easy to see because they're black and white. They've got Belisha beacons, and it makes it easier for pedestrians to know where to cross safely and for vehicle drivers to know when to stop. But if you've got a load of coloured painting, you don't even know whether it's a zebra crossing or not.
Yeah, I did see the picture that was used as well, and to make it even worse, it's sort of squiggly paint that goes across the zebra crossing. It's a mess.
Oh, I hate this stuff. Genuinely, I want a law that bans them. And they say, we haven't got enough money to do, Meals on Wheels for elderly or social care or to take kids into care who are being abused. But, yeah, we've got 35 grand just spare down the back of the sofa for this. It's maddening. Callum McGoldrick, thank you so much for joining us, researcher at Taxpayers Alliance. Benedict Spence. I mean, it's nice to know the world is still quietly mad while the BBC immolates.
I'm amazed by the idea that we're funding tax collection in Ethiopia.
It's just astonishing.
We're not collecting enough tax. Why? We haven't got any money. OK, well, we're going to train some tax collectors. Great, you've trained them. We still don't have any money. Great. What a fantastic use of money that is.
It is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, one of the least of the many extraordinary stories that we've got to talk about today. Ian Collins is here. Ian, we have a feast, a smorgasbord.
It is a feast, but please leave the zebra crossings alone. Not everything is black and white, Julia, as you know. Listen, I think it adds a nice touch of class, frankly, to the... I mean, you can't... These people are ill, by the way. There's something wrong with them. Somebody at a meeting went, I've got this idea. That's what I always find interesting. There's an individual somewhere that came up with it, and everyone in the room went, that's a good idea.
Yeah. It's also the LGBTQ+. It's like, what is the plus?
Yeah.
The T's got nothing to do with the LGB. The Q is just basically unattractive people with weird hair. That's what Q means.
I'm not part of this organisation. What are you talking about?
How do you rate the Tash, by the way?